That one. Good evening, welcome to the February meeting of the York Planning Committee. I'm Tony Fisher, I'm chair of the committee. Around the table we've got the members down the sides who will make the decisions tonight. We have a number of officers from democracy, planning and legal services who will give advice as and when required. All I ask is they could just introduce themselves and their title as they first speak. That would be very helpful. A little bit of housekeeping. If members could make sure their phones are not, and public are, could turn their phones to silent or off completely, please, so there's no interruptions. Toilets are through there. We'll take a break probably after the first item for a few minutes for a comfort break. There are no fire alarms planned, but if the fire alarm does go off, we can assume it's a genuine incident. We leave via that door, go down the stairs and meet outside the Grand Hotel for a roll call. This meeting is being live broadcast on YouTube, so welcome to those who are watching there and anyone who watches in the future. We'll start off with apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Melly, and she's been substituted by Councillor Webb. Welcome to the meeting, Councillor Webb. Are there any other apologies? I don't think there are, that's fine. Moving on now to declarations of interest. Do any members have declarations of interest in the items tonight? Councillor Wardby.
Just to note that for transparency, I know that the Mecca Bingo didn't have their lease renewed, but my husband is a bingo caller at Clifton Bingo, so was the competition. It's just in case this doesn't go through. And just to say, I'm not predetermined or anything like that, so I feel I can participate.
Thank you for that. Okay, moving on. Oh, sorry, Councillor, I didn't see your hand. Apologies.
Just a very brief one for Trustpilot. I think it's mentioned some on the first application. I have recently joined the car club and I've not had a chance to put it on my declaration of interest yet. So there is reference to car club spaces in there. I don't think I gain any particular advantage from those spaces.
Thank you very much. Oh, Councillor Webb, sorry.
Yeah, I'm in the car club too,
right.
Just for clarity.
Councillor de Gaulle.
I'm as well, I don't see it's relevant.
We've got an avalanche of car club members, haven't we? Good. Okay, anyone else? Thank you very much. Moving on to the minutes. The minutes are on page 3 to 12. Are there any changes that members would like to see, or are you happy to approve them? I have one issue with them. It says on page 8 at the bottom, it says that the bottom of page 8, the bottom paragraph, it says Councillor Pavlovich moved and the chair seconded. Could I just for accuracy point out it wasn't me, it was Councillor Fenton who actually seconded that application. I couldn't remember doing it and I watched the YouTube video and it was definitely Councillor Fenton. Are there any other changes that are inaccuracies or changes that members would like to make to those minutes? In that case, are you happy to approve them? If you could just show, please. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on now, we come to public participation. This is on the general aspects. Now, there was a slightly late registration, but I've accepted it from York Cycle Campaign. And this is about both applications, so I thought I'd take it under section 3. The person speaking is Chris Copland. If Chris Copland would like to come up and have your 3 minutes, I'd be grateful.
Green. Okay. Right, start again. Right, I'll begin. My name is Christopher Copland. I'm here representing the York Cycle Campaign. I'm a former teacher at the university, so I'm familiar with the student body, but also the balance of their needs with the rest of the community. And that's the capacity in which I'm speaking. I'll make a few remarks about the Mecca Bingo developments, but I spoke about this at the last meeting, so I won't go over old ground again. And I'll add a few comments about the new development on James Street. So to cut to the chase, Mecca Bingo. We acknowledge that additional future cycling parking provision has been mooted in the new documents, but would draw your attention to the fact that the actual provision remains at 168 spaces, which is 2/3 of the residents. The government guidelines, and I've popped these into your email boxes, I've taken that liberty, recommend 1 parking space per bedroom in a development like this. So that is lower than the standard guidelines from the government. We appreciate the commitment to a travel plan. This is a good move. And note that this is prepared in accordance with national guidance. So again, another push towards following those guidelines. And also notes that recent news that York will become a base for the Active Travel England. Again, I think a spur for us to act in an exemplary fashion with active travel. I understand that the building layout on Bluebridge Lane is being reconsidered to allow delivery vehicles to drop off. This is a positive move, but I would note that cyclists enter and leave the site on Bluebridge Lane. It's also part of the orbital routes, so other cycle users are on Bluebridge Lane, and we would ask that care needs to be taken with how vehicle traffic is managed on Bluebridge Lane, because obviously there is potential for conflicts. Switching over to Alton Cars, the new student block on that site, and I find myself going over a number of the same points. The cycling parking provision for that new site is 155 spaces for 320 residents. So once again, not meeting with the standard government guidance of 1 space per bedroom. So we would urge that point again. Okay, some concerns about the 2-tier cycle parking on both sites, and issues about access to the upper tier. And I would stress on the Mecca site, now that the cycle store is now a through route, actual access to that becomes more difficult. Draw your attention to that. Final point, James Street. Any of you who've been recently driven from your car club or cycled as I do along James Street, very busy street with access to numerous retail sites. Not an easy place to cycle. So we would like to see a commitment from the council to improve the cycle infrastructure along James Street as a condition of this development being approved. And I think I would stress that point particularly. I think there are credible road safety issues there. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
We'll take those into consideration at the time of the actual applications are considered. Right, moving on to the plans list, we move on to plan number 4A, which is Mecca Bingo 68 Fishergate, demolition of existing buildings and redevelopment of the site to form 270-room purpose-built student accommodation with car parking, landscaping and facilities. Right, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So members deferred this application on the 2nd of December last year. I'm just going to run through the slides. So this is a location plan. If you can just see where my red cursor is. The site here, outlined in red. That's the illustration of the surrounding conservation area. The photos here show Bluebridge Lane and the rear elevation facing south towards William Court. That's the front, side and rear from 25 William Court. So this is the proposed site plan here. You can see the buildings in white here with the landscaping areas here and around here. The changes since the previous application is the entrance is now located on Bluebridge Lane down here. Through these, again, these are your elevations. A minute. And again, elevations here, here. And then your floor plans, which illustrate the uses in there. I can probably leave that one on for now. I'm just going to pass to Jonathan to do the update. Thank you.
Thanks. So to run through the committee updates, firstly, clarification to an amendment in the report, the recommendation in relation to the section 106 for assistance with travel planning. We're just asking that members, we've asked for £25,000 there as a contribution. We'd ask to adjust that figure so it's up to 25,000 because we think that figure might be on the high side. We want to agree a figure that's reasonable and related to the development. The obligation is only for the council to assist with the developer's travel plan, and 25,000 is a figure we've used elsewhere where the council has been fully undertaking the travel plan. So that's why we feel we would arrive at a lower figure. So if it can be delegated to us to do something within the region of up to 25,000. And then further representations made. We have had a late objection letter received yesterday, which relates to the Equalities Act. I'll just read a summary of that objection. They point out that the officer's report refers to an alternative bingo facility at Clifton. The objector says this venue is less likely to be accessible for the elderly or disabled, and there's no assessment in the officer's report as to whether there is comparable parking provision at that site. This demonstrates that the duty to have due regard to section 149, part 1 of the Equalities Act has not been fulfilled. It goes on to say the committee must have sufficient information as to the previous use by people with protected characteristics in order to fulfill the duty to have due regard. Without this information, the planning authority, as a decision maker, will be unable to evaluate the impact of the closure upon those who are elderly or disabled. And in brackets it says, and they also may be female. A second point is around viability, and it says there's no viability report associated with the closure of the former use, and it's suggested that members could see this as a reason to refuse the scheme. The other objection we've had relates to highways effects, and it makes some comments on the applicant's transport note. What the transport note does is it uses a nationally recognised database to give you a picture of what the proposed traffic movements could be with the previous use and with the proposed use. And they're saying it does an unfair comparison because when it looks at the use of a bingo hall, it takes possible vehicle movements on a Friday, for example, and that's looking at a worst case scenario. So they feel that that's an unfair comparison with the significantly lower amount of traffic that's being projected to occur with the use that's now proposed. We also had further representation today from York Cycle Campaign, which I won't go into detail. I think they've just been summarised by Mr. Copeland. But we've done a brief response to members in relation to the query raised in respect of the Equalities Act and whether we paid due regard to that. We feel that we have paid due regard to the Equalities Act in our assessment of the application. We don't feel that there are any implications arising from this scheme. What we've done is we've took into account the MPPF, and the paragraph relates to paragraph 93 on social, recreational and cultural facilities and services that community needs. We've not found that there's a loss of a facility that the community demonstrably needs. And also we'd point out that through the publicity that's been undertaken as part of the application, we haven't had any representations from people who used to use the bingo hall who are citing adverse social effects that they've suffered since the loss, or that they've been socially disadvantaged in any way since the facility has closed. So we don't feel that there's conflict with the Equalities Act in that respect. That's the extent of the update.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, in accordance with the new procedures we decided to put in place, we'll take public participation next, and we have, I think, 5 public speakers on this. Well, five different sets of public speakers. The first person is Anne Clayton, who is a neighbour who is speaking in objection. So if you'd like to come up, if you press your microphone until it turns green, you go. I'll give you 3 minutes and I'll give you a warning at 30 seconds that your time is running out. Okay.
Right. Thank you for letting me speak. We object to the revised scheme on the grounds that the substations and switch house will harm the amenity of residents and the development will impact on our privacy and to be detrimental to the highway's safety. As you know, paragraph 130 of NPP states planning decisions should create places that promote health and well-being. The draft plan adds new developments should mitigate potential adverse impacts from noise and avoid negative impacts on health and quality of life. The developers originally placed a single 13 square metre substation alongside our house, the only property bordering the site. In December, they added a network substation and switching house covering 38 square metres, 3 times larger than needed to service the development. The planning officer proposes moving the station louvre to reduce noise. The only noise impact assessment so far was taken at the junction of Fishergate and Bluebridge Lane. The applicant relies on manufacturers' data to calculate the noise impact of the substations on 25 William Court and neighbours. It follows you cannot conclude definitively that the substations will not have an adverse effect on our amenity. Read paragraph 537. There is no provision to mitigate the effect of electromagnetic fields generated by substations. These pass straight through brick walls. The World Health Organization say most scientific research examining long-term risks from EMF has focused on childhood leukemia. In 2002, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified EMFs as possibly carcinogenic to humans. A turfed sloping roof and landscaping will do nothing to offset such health hazards 10 feet from our kitchen table. As Fishergate planning panel say, the substation is clearly in the wrong place and should be resited from residential property. Further impacts on our amenity include overlooking. Offsetting windows only means our sitting room and bedroom windows are overlooked by 4 floors of flats further down Bluebridge Lane. 5.38 of your report says the rear of the northwest wing is now 35 feet from our boundary. It fails to mention a 14-foot wide substation in between. 545 of the report says this is essentially a car-free development, but the applicant's plan for the proposed loading bay shows William Court as a turning head, and its transport statement predicts 8 two-way vehicle movements a day for primary servicing and delivery, including bottle banks. Paragraph 549 tells us this busy turning head is now also an access point to cycle stores and presumably an exit among the bin wagons. We believe information submitted to date is sufficient to confirm that ours and others' amenity will be affected. The substations will harm the amenity of residents and ourselves in particular. Our privacy is violated and that the development will threaten highway safety. NPP F11D is not met. There are adverse impacts which outweigh the benefits of the proposal, and on that basis, the application must be refused.
Thank you. Well within your 3 minutes. Are there any, could you just stay for a second, if possible, please? Are there any members who would like to ask Mrs. Clayton any questions, please? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Clayton, I've just picked up where you'd said that the network substation was 3 times larger than needed. Could you elaborate further on that?
The original substation, I think, is 22 square metres. The developers placed the 13 square metre at our house, and in a meeting that we had with the architect and the communications officer who came to our house to show us new plans, they told us that the plan was now, as we noticed, it was larger, and they told us it was because they were going to build additional supply so they could sell it back to the grid.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any further members who'd like to ask a question? In that case, thank you very much for your contribution. We'll take that into account when we come to decide the application. Thank you. Next speaker is Councillor Dave Taylor, who is speaking in objection, and there is a photograph from a resident which Councillor Taylor has distributed around, so if you want to have a look at that, it may be pertinent. I think you know the drill, Dave. Give you time to sort yourself out.
It's new, just turn it round. I had the same problem.
Right, 3 minutes, and I'll give you a shout at 30 seconds to go.
Okay, it appears that one of my main planks of objection, that the site should be preserved for leisure use, has been undermined by the government changing the use classes in 2021. I was unaware of this change and I apologise to the officers. It is a shame, though, if we're to lose the site of a concert hall where the Beatles once played and the site of an exquisite Art Deco cinema. The proposed blocks are overbearing to some neighbours, but considerably less offensive than the hideous edifice of the Mecca Bingo building, which is truly the worst lump of architecture in Fishergate Ward. However, before I am overcome with praise, I must again register my grave concerns about the traffic impacts on a narrow cul-de-sac opposite a primary school and in an air quality management area. Since the previous committee meeting, developers have amended the plans to move the main entrance from Fishergate to Blue Bridge Lane. I fear this creates as many problems as it seeks to solve. A local resident has provided a photograph of the congestion at the junction of Blue Bridge Lane and Fishergate in the morning. I think you all have seen a copy of this. And she fears that this chaos will be repeated throughout the day and the evening. She requests me to point out to members that the committee report fails to state that Blue Bridge Lane is a cul-de-sac. Secondly, it fails to acknowledge that some motor vehicles regularly turn around in the area at the bottom of Blue Bridge Lane next to the slipway, thereby cutting across a public footpath. Thirdly, it fails to state that there are no parking restrictions on Sundays or to note that the lane is fully parked up during the day on Sundays. And finally, it fails to recognise the increased parking pressure at school pick-up and drop-off times. I think that's depicted in this picture, resulting from the loss of the Mecca parking area. My own view is that a mass of delivery vehicles from supermarkets, Amazon, hot food takeaways will frequently be turning in and out of Blue Bridge Lane from the main road and backing into the entrance to Fishergate's house in order to turn around. This is unreasonable and it must be resolved before planning permission may be given. May I make one further point? If planning is to be given for this huge development, which has no parking provision, and if the same occurs for the FULM-based site over the main road, also with no parking provision, and the Persimmon development on the Barbican site also gains permission, then I think there is a much greater need for public parking in this vicinity, such as the multi-storey car park proposed for St George's Fields.
Thank you very much. You get 3 minutes. Absolutely down.
I practiced.
Are there any questions for Councillor Taylor? Are there any questions for Councillor Taylor from members? No, in that case, thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Waters, it's just put a late.
I just felt it was being left out a bit, but
Thank you.
would it be fair to say that there'd be none of these problems if the student accommodation was actually located on campus? I seem to recall your objection that's referred to in the agenda says that you think that there's far too much student accommodation being built in this area.
My objections along those lines go back to the dates when the university was given permission to extend to Heslington East. I said many times at that time that more accommodation should have been built at Heslington East to soak up the vast increase in students accommodation that would be needed across the city. I know the developers will argue that by building purpose-built accommodation, it takes the pressure off terraced housing and other housing in the city centre. Maybe that's true, but I think what you're asking me to say, Mark, is that more student accommodation should have been built on the university land in the first place and not allowing the city to have to pick up the tab for it.
Just to come back in, I didn't actually intend using this at this point, but after what you've said, I think it would be worthwhile so that this committee and anybody that's watching, anybody that takes an interest in such matters, realises why we're at the state we're at. Do you share my concern that the wording of what's previously been used for development control purposes, Development Control Local Plan 2005, and specifically policy ED 10, the University of York and York St John College will be expected to accommodate any extra demand created by an increase in student numbers on their campuses or on land in their ownership or control. There's been somewhat changed over the last 10 or 15 years of debate with the local plan to what was submitted in 2018 and what's relied upon by officers in this policy H7. And you'll realise the different nuances on the wording now. Policy H7. The University of York and York St John must address the need for any additional student housing which arises because of their future expansion of student numbers. In assessing need, consideration will be given to the capacity of independent providers of bespoke student housing in the city and whether or not it is economically prudent to provide additional student accommodation. To meet any projected shortfall, provision by the University of York can be made on either campus. Provision by York St John is expected to be off campus, but in locations convenient to the main campus. Everything seems to have changed from 2005, when we were determined as a local authority for the universities to accommodate any extra demand on their campuses. We're now at a stage where certain members will no doubt say this afternoon, well, we can only take what's in front of us and we can't do this with policy. That's what's going in front of the local plan. And if that gets approved, there'll be no defence to even more of this. Do you agree, Councillor Taylor?
Well, it was your speech, Mark, not mine. But in essence, I think I do agree. I think we've moved a great deal since 2005. A lot of members of the public say that there isn't enough, or there is too much emphasis on building student accommodation. I know there is a grave shortage of student accommodation, as well as there is for ordinary general accommodation in the city. How that is resolved is partially for you as members of this committee to decide.
Any further questions? In that case, I'll thank you for your contribution. We'll take over your account when we decide the application. Move on now. Our third speaker is Councillor Pete Kilbane, who is speaking in objection. I think you know the routine. You've got 3 minutes. I'll give you a shout, about 30 seconds to go.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by saying I don't envy any of you around this table tonight. You've got very difficult decisions to make on this application and the subsequent one. And I know that for many of you, in your hearts, you will want to refuse the application, but in your heads, you know you need to set aside any prejudices you may have and judge it purely on the application that is in front of you. And I think, you know, you are also operating in quite a difficult political climate. We've seen 30 years really now of housing not being treated as a home, place where you can put down roots, live a full life, maybe raise a family, but it's become more and more assets to be monetized for commercial return, and that has changed the face of our city, and not, I think, for the better. What that's given rise to is more short-hold tenancies, temporary accommodation such as this one, and short-term holiday lets. And this, in effect, especially in the city centre wards, is hollowing out our communities. Now, I have nothing at all against students. I love their presence in the city. I came to this city as a student at the University of York and stayed because I liked it so much, and what's not to like. It is still a great place, but it's more likely that people who are on insecure short-term lets are less likely to invest time and effort in the place where they live. And for the most part, the general public don't understand that you, as a planning committee, can actually do very little about that, except in this case. Because this application seeks to remove a community facility and cultural asset. Now, culture is a living thing. It requires places where people can gather, get to know each other, have fun, and build community. Our emerging local plan, policies D3 and HW1, give you the power in this instance to refuse this application. So it gives you the opportunity to say enough is enough, to push back against the hollowing out of our communities and instead protect the spaces where community thrives. Thank you.
Oh, right. I was just going to give you a 30-second warning, but you've preempted that. Thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Kilbane, please, from members? Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Kilbane, I think there'd be some people in York who might turn around and think that this is a bingo hall and therefore isn't necessarily a cultural venue. Given that York's got many other cultural venues, what's so special about this one, I suppose?
Well, first of all, anybody who thinks that bingo is not a cultural activity has clearly never been in a bingo hall. And secondly, anybody holding such views would be guilty of cultural snobbery. We must be clear that what our emerging local plan does is it protects existing facilities, and applications should not be approved unless they add to those facilities or at the very least replace them. So it is about the spaces. You know, what we are short of in York is land, and once the land has gone, it's gone, and there won't be any cultural facilities or community facilities coming back to that space. If we want to have healthy communities, they need a place to meet, and people tend to meet in places where they have fun.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for Councillor Kilbane? In that case, I thank you very much for your contribution, and we'll take your views into account when we determine the application. Our fourth speaker is Stephanie Lehman, who is speaking in objection on behalf of Fishergate House and the Fishergate Court residents. If you'd like to come up and... As usual, 3 minutes when you're ready. I will start the clock.
Okay. The residents of Fishergate House and Court are extremely concerned with the latest proposals and would like you and the developer to consider 3 issues: the access into the development, servicing of the development, and changing the user group from students to everyone. The latest scheme shows the entrance to the development virtually opposite the access into our car park. Bluebridge Lane is currently only just wide enough for 2 vehicles. In fact, it's 5.4 metres wide, which is just under the minimum carriageway width stated in the York Highway Design Guide. Both pavements either side should be 2 metres, but on our side it's 1.5. It makes no sense to us, either architecturally or from an end user point of view, to bring everyone into the site from Bluebridge Lane. The National Model Design Code, which feeds into the NPPF, states that new development should integrate the requirements of utility providers, refuse collection and emergency access without compromising the quality of place by obstruction of movement or visual intrusion. It is felt that utility provider in this context would include deliveries of goods by supermarkets and internet shopping. Clearly, if the entrance and drop-off points were on Bluebridge Lane, it would compromise and obstruct us. H7 of the local plan also states the development should not be detrimental to the amenity of nearby residents, and the design and access arrangements would have a minimal impact on the local area. The previous scheme, where the entrance was from Fishergate, is far better on many levels. We ask that the entrance is reinstated to Fishergate in any approved plans. There has been no attempt by the developers to accommodate servicing within the site. Neither is there any evidence of compromise on the 275 rooms proposed, which is more than double the existing area density. It is not acceptable to rely on the existing road network to support the development. I did suggest in my objections that a drop-off bay was positioned on Fishergate. However, I understand that the planning team do not want to set a precedent, but don't we already have a precedent with the drop-off bay for the Barbican Centre around the corner? If the developer was willing to step back the frontage of the building, as has been suggested by the Conservation Department, Landscape Architect and York Civic Trust, then a safe drop-off zone could be created.
I urge the planning department need to be more mindful of internal responses and clause 130 of the MPPF. Finally, I am a little bit shocked that we've got a section 106 agreement, which has been made with the developer. The City of York planning information on the principles of section 106 agreements clearly states on page 6 that sheltered retirement, student or holiday accommodation is excluded. So do we not have a conflict of interest here? Because clearly the planning department has agreed a payment for approval of the scheme and our neighbourhood will end up being the sacrificial lamb. It also follows that if the developer is having to pay a commuted sum, couldn't this development now be turned into single occupancy housing for everyone? It doesn't have to be for students. There is a massive shortfall in accommodation for all single people of all ages, not just students. Thank you.
Yes, obviously one of your main concerns, I understand, is about your access to your development being directly opposite. And just wanted, can you confirm that there is at the moment there's parking not allowed on your side of the road, but there is on the other side of the road?
Yeah, and so often when you're coming out, because cars come round the corner from the A19 quite fast, and you have to slam the brakes on because we don't have great visual ability at that corner at all. And so it's often difficult to get out if any vehicles are parked on the other side of the road, which is nearly every time I'm trying to come out.
So from what you're saying, just to clarify, that is quite regularly parked up, even though it's restricted during the daytime to a maximum of an hour, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. Yeah, no, there's often vehicles on the other side. But yes, it's just a speed that people come round the corner in, because our access point is not that far from the corner. So I think anything that is going to cause one lane to be blocked virtually permanently is just going to be a liability and a danger.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned about seeing this as potentially for single occupancy accommodation for York residents.
Yes.
Would, for example, your Fishergate Court people that you're representing be more comfortable with, for example, a mixed-use development that included a degree of single occupancy accommodation and a redeveloped community venue?
I think they will, because obviously if it is just for students, it's going to be a completely enclosed, introverted sort of community that nobody else is going to be invited into. And the average age of nearly everybody around that area is about 50, and that's including my son who's 12. You know, it's an older person sort of enclave, and to bring 275 students plus their partners and any other friends that they might have, the impact is just going to be horrific. But I do think we're concentrating on students. Where do students go once they graduate? Where are they going to find the housing? You know, are we going to say, bye, sorry, you've got to go? I just think it's very wrong to just focus on students for housing. I think everybody because we have more single people nowadays anyway, you know, you tend to be at all stages of your life, even when you're older. So I do think, you know, there needs to be that opportunity. And I do think they're missing, you know, we could have a subterranean parking area with car clubs, you know, that could be used by the rest of the community.
Just one final point, because I seem to remember that you're an architect yourself by profession.
Yeah.
Would, again, the people in that area be more comfortable with the current design than what is existing, or the current proposed design? Yeah,
generally nobody liked the Mecca, because it is a bit like looking at the Great Wall of China. I mean, there have been concerns about the communal external area. I mean, I know that they need to provide an amenity, but there are concerns about how is that controlled, you know, noise levels. I mean, I've been outside in my dressing gown trying to find out where the now music's coming from, and it's come all the way from Festival Flats, and it sounds as if it's just outside in Bluebridge Lane, so noise does travel. So, you know, it's the impact of things like that. It's just,
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, apologies if you've heard all this before at the previous meeting, but I wasn't at the previous meeting.
Neither was I.
Well, we'll share this then. Could you talk to the school traffic? Because obviously I've been led to believe that the car park is used for sort of part of school traffic. So I imagine there's a lot of that going on down this street. Could you sort of talk?
You mean the Mecca car park at the moment? Yes, it is.
So what are your thoughts around what's going to happen next if this was to go ahead then?
Well, yeah, we're going to have people coming into our car park again, which I have to monitor on a regular basis. But yes, it's tight for them, you know, because parents are coming home from work and often they're not working, you know, they're not working somewhere where they can walk there. So they have to park up somewhere. So it just becomes a bun fight. And they park right up on the corner on the double yellow lines. But it's only for a short period of time, admittedly. But yeah, I don't know what's going to happen to that. Obviously, the number of children has increased every year at Fishergate. I think maybe this year is the first time it levelled off, but after COVID, where everyone needs to do things, maybe it will rise again. Don't know.
Could I just clarify that do the people who use a park on the Mecca car park for access to Fishergate School, is that a legal
well, that's only
or is it just simply because it's actually a
they've only just started advertising parking on the car park over the past few months.
Is that the Mecca who, sorry, the owners of the site?
It's the owners who've done that,
right.
yeah, I believe.
Okay, so it's a temporary arrangement.
It's a temporary measure to get some money.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Nope, in that case, I'll thank you very much for your contribution. We'll doubtless take your views into account when we come to determine this. We now have 3 people, Aaron Tilley, Michelle Davis and Richard Townend, who are going to speak in support. They are speaking on behalf of the applicant. So if you'd like to come forward, I'd be grateful. You're going to speak, no problem. Okay, when you're ready,
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to start by talking about the benefits of the scheme, because obviously we've heard a lot about harm and impact, and the starting point for any planning decision actually is paragraph 11 of the MPPF, which is where the decision maker has to weigh harm and benefits in the balance. So just talking briefly about benefits, the scheme represents over £38 million worth of investment into the city. It's the efficient reuse of a brownfield site in a sustainable location, which is exactly what the government is telling us we should do. It will provide high quality student bed spaces at a time when demand continues to outstrip supply. I think there's figures in the report for the next item on the agenda that clarify that. I said this last time, I was challenged on it, but it does allow for the future release of HMOs back into the housing market by the removal of students from them. And in the context of York, I understand that you have at best a 3-year housing land supply compared to the government requirement of 5. So there is a clear housing need, and it would result in the removal of a building which everybody seems to agree is somewhat incongruous in the street scene. So I just wanted to set the tone of the benefits really. In terms of the points about community use, the 2 policies referred to in an emerging draft local plan that's not yet adopted. The cultural facilities policy isn't, in my view, strictly relevant because it's about the provision of new cultural facilities. But in terms of the community facility point, from a planning legislation point of view, it isn't classed as a community facility, and I think Jonathan has covered that in his report. I just wanted to highlight that this building has been empty for nearly 2 years now. So it was a bingo hall. It hasn't been a bingo hall for 2 years. When the current owner acquired the site, Mecca Bingo were apparently already in rent arrears. They fell into rent arrears again in March 21. And they were protected by their lease, and they had options to renew that lease, which they declined to do in September 21. So I think there is a point there that this was a national bingo operator who clearly couldn't make this building work. And the final point I'd like to make, we're happy to take questions from members linked to objector comments, but we've worked, we've gone away since the last committee meeting and listened to members, residents and yourselves at committee, and we've made significant changes to the scheme. We haven't just tweaked it. They're highlighted in the brochure, but in terms of the substation, which I would say is actually the minimum requirement for this size of development, and Richard can explain that in more detail. We have shifted it away as far as we can. We've lowered the roof by about 450 mil, sloped it, put a green roof on it. We're moving the louvers to the other side. We've worked as hard as we can on that substation. We've completely relocated the main entrance to Bluebridge Lane. And again, Erin can talk about that, but we're not actually proposing anything new on Bluebridge Lane. We're repurposing what's already there. Okay. We've increased the number of DDA compliant rooms, and we've obviously increased the cycle provision, spread it through the development more, and allowed for different points of access. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members got any questions they'd like to ask? Councillor Fenton and then Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for those comments. In relation to the points that the public speaker made around impact of the substation in relation to electromagnetic fields, which I'm not sure whether it came up when we first considered the application, but I'd be grateful if you could address that point, and also the comment around the substation being larger than it would need to be because of a desire to use it as a means of generating income through it holding electricity. But if you could address those 2 points.
I can answer the first point. Richard will take the second point. I'm not an electromagnetic expert, but actually Jonathan deals with it on page 32 of the officer's report, where he effectively has quoted Energy Networks Association advice on electromagnetic fields. They fall rapidly with distance, usually indistinguishable from other fields present in homes. And the end of the quote is, there is no restriction on EMF grounds on how close houses can be to substations. Not my area of expertise, but that's the evidence in the report. Do you want to talk about the substation?
Yeah, I think just to add to that as well, the arrangement and the distance from properties, both the new development and existing properties, has been through and agreed with the network service provider, has been a sufficient distance away, because they themselves will not allow it to be built if they weren't happy with that. The actual substation itself consists of 3 parts. There's a relocated network substation, which is currently at the north of the site. There's a substation which is for the development itself, purely for the development itself, nothing else. Because there's some confusion over that before, it wasn't the intention. There's no intention to do anything other than is needed for the site, and a small switch room that then services as well. So just purely for that site and the relocation of the network substation that exists on the boundary at the moment, at the north end of the site.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Lomas next, if that's okay. I've got you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask, because I couldn't find it in the updates, how many cycle parking spaces are there now? And a supplementary to that then is, how many cycle parking spaces are there for adapted cycles for disabled people?
So there are, according to my notes, 10 additional extra wide spaces for, 14 in total DDA compliant extra wide cycle spaces now proposed. And the total number of cycle spaces should be in the report somewhere. $168, I think. Yeah, 168, sorry.
Could you say that again?
168.
Okay, I've got Councillor Pavlovitz, then Councillor Waters, then Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I think it's only right that we give some of the public participants an airing when we ask our questions. So can I just ask you why student accommodation as opposed to single-use normal, if you like, accommodation was the option that you've chosen here? You do build, I think the developers do build housing.
The developer is primarily a student residential developer. I think we did talk about this last time and very much talked about the fact that it is in terms of the viability and how the site stacks up financially that makes PBSA, as we call it, viable as opposed to open market housing, if you want to call it that. So it's a viability point.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Waters next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to this substation again, well, if it's perfectly safe and doesn't provide any noise problems and you were redrawing these plans, why didn't you put it smack bang in the middle of that development then and take the problem away from the existing residents?
Do you mean within the courtyard?
Yeah.
The position development has been obviously aligned with the service providers as well to the network hub. There's an easement requirement of access for cabling that runs across and down and out into the network onto the road. So you have to obviously keep that clear of any development potential. So that position has been developed through with the close integration of the electrical service provider.
So as much as anything, it's economic, because if it had been relocated into the middle of the site, you would have had to leave a significant amount of space around it.
I think it's the best route of where the cables currently go and access through around the edge of the site. So we're kind of moving it around the edge of the site. I believe they currently come down, run down and back into sort of to the west of the site. So we're kind of following that round. I'm not an M&E consultant, I'm an architect. I'm basing it on my information that we've obviously had through the process with the team.
But obviously relocating cables is very expensive.
It is, so it is typically, and also it's disruptive as well.
Right, thank you. Just going back to the statement that was made again about building this type of accommodation and releasing HMOs back into the residential market, I'm quite open if you can give me any locations anywhere in York where this has happened. Numbers of housing, just one as an example. You've made a remark, please back it up.
Yeah, I think I said last time that for me, I haven't got evidence of a street in York where HMOs have been released back and a family's moved in. It's a common sense inevitability if that you have, I don't know, 100,000 students in York and you have 80,000 bed spaces that by default you are freeing up the housing stock of HMOs. Otherwise,
just unfortunately, my experience is totally the opposite.
So I suppose as well as the market point, which is that operators know their market. So your planning committee wouldn't have before them all of these applications for student accommodation if the demand wasn't there. So what I'm saying is that we know that these developments are going to be filled by students. So there must come a point where the supply of purpose-built student accommodation is releasing up family homes because students are making that choice.
If the demand keeps increasing, then it doesn't. And as we'll see from the next application, if those figures are produced, the universities are just taking advantage of this to keep increasing their student numbers. If they were obligated to provide this accommodation on campus, this wouldn't be happening.
That's not really an argument for me to comment on.
With respect, I think we have to determine the application on the table. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, but I think we have to look at this application as what it is. It's an application for purpose-built student accommodation. I'll move on now to Councillor Webb, who I think was next, and I think Councillor Gorn.
Thank you, Chair. My question's around your thought process around servicing deliveries and stuff like that to the site. I've heard from a couple of public speakers about whether a lay-by was appropriate or not appropriate. And yeah, I'd just like to hear a little bit more about your thoughts around why you chose not to go that way and And just, yeah, what was the reasoning for that? Because it would seem like it would make sense.
I think, excuse me, just for your benefit, councillor, to revisit what was originally put on the table was a lay-by on Fishergate, with the Fishergate access point being the primary point of access into this site, and being the only pedestrian access point into the site at that time. We've taken comments on board from this committee, local residents and the highways officer, and quite a significant undertaking as well as part of the architect to change the layout of the site in terms of access to incorporate a primary access point on Bluebridge Lane, which will remove any vehicle access via a lay-by on Fishergate. And as Michelle pointed out before, we're repurposing what is an existing car parking facility on Bluebridge Lane to accommodate service vehicles. And by service vehicles on Bluebridge Lane, we're referring to the day-to-day delivery types, the parcel deliveries, the Amazon deliveries, the takeaways, and taxi pickup drop-off, which can also utilise the remainder of the on-street parking which is available. It is only short-term car parking for a maximum duration of 60 minutes. So there is a relatively reasonable turnover in parking vehicles on Bluebridge Lane. So there will be additional space throughout the day. And the more bulkier deliveries, we are proposing to utilise the existing facility again, which is available on William Court. So we're not introducing anything new. We are trying to capture all the servicing facilities within the available infrastructure on the highway in order to ensure that operation, vehicle movements are no worse off than the current situation.
Just sort of follow up on that, but you're proposing to utilise the existing spaces you've just said, but for an extra 275 individual dwellings. So would you accept that if currently the existing facilities are there for what's currently there, there would be a need to increase those facilities? Does that make sense? If there's more people, you're going to need more service space. Yes?
Not necessarily, no. So we've obviously done our analysis of this site to determine that it's an accessible location that is in agreement with council highways officers. We anticipate a large proportion of occupants, residents to walk, cycle, use public transport. They'll use local facilities, walk into takeaways, to local shops to undertake those daily day-to-day needs. There will be takeaway deliveries, there will be Amazon deliveries. However, that will be accommodated within the facilities provided. The reception area will be manned 24 hours a day. So the Amazon deliveries in particular do not have to hang around for residents to come down to the gate. They can drop off and be signed for by reception staff. Therefore, the Amazon delivery drivers don't have to hang around for too long. They can drop off and be away within 5-10 minutes time. Similar with takeaway deliveries, they can be given to reception. They don't have to wait for residents to come all the way down. And again, with parcel deliveries as well. So we are eliminating long-term stopping by introducing that 24-hour waiting facility.
Okay, I've got Councillor de Gorn and then Councillor Waters again.
Thank you. It's actually nicely follows on the same theme. The problem with your analysis about using the existing facilities is that the limited waiting only applies up until 6 o'clock at night as it stands. So what I'm really wanting to ask is, I'll obviously ask officers when we get to that point, but would you be prepared to make a contribution to changing the traffic regulation orders on Bluebridge Lane to accommodate a specific delivery bay? Because at the moment, as is proposed, once somebody's parked there after 6 o'clock at night, they can leave the car there till 8 o'clock the next morning. There's nowhere then for your deliveries to take place. And that would then mean that the delivery lorries either waiting on the W lines close to the junction or double parking, blocking everybody getting in or out of Bluebridge Lane while they're conducting that delivery.
The lay-by proposed is a permanent lay-by. So it will be replacing 2 car parking spaces essentially.
So-
It will be marked out.
So
as a
you're
lay-by.
saying a separate lay-bay from the existing arrangement?
Yeah, so we will be taking the
So
space.
that will
was op-
require a change to traffic regulation orders, is what
It
you're
will do,
saying?
yeah.
And secondly, I suppose that ties in with that is the provision at the moment is up to an hour between 8 and 6, which obviously does limit longer term parking, but during the evenings, there's going to be no space for taxis. And, you know, if you've got space for 2 vehicles, once you've got 2 delivery lorries there, there's nowhere for the taxis. They're going to be stuck in the middle of the road, blocking the route in or out of to 25 houses on William Court and the houses on Fishergate House. So do you think that the traffic regulation orders will need to be reviewed? That's all I'm saying at this stage, you know, and to take that into account.
Not at all. Like I say, the lay-by is sufficient for 2 taxis to drop off, pick up. It's sufficient for a online shopping lorry to stop there. Just touching on the point I mentioned before about the 24-hour reception, there is no reason for vehicles to stop in that lay-by for any long period of time. So a vehicle will arrive, it will be free within 5 to 10 minutes.
I don't know if you've seen this picture here.
I appreciate that. I've been on site as well and seen during school pickup and drop off that it tends to get busy. That's a tendency close to any schools. And I think even the resident pointed out that is only short term and quickly stops.
Just one different question on the cycle provision, if I may. I've very much welcomed the notion of providing some cycling, which is going to come out onto Bluebridge Lane. Although from looking at the plan, you won't be able to access that from some of the other cycle parking. Can you just sort of outline to us how many sort of cycle spaces would be sort of coming out onto Fishergate itself at the front of the site, or will they be able to access through the rear onto Bluebridge Lane?
So the principle of access for cyclists is to utilise all points to various parking. Richard's best place to confirm that.
Just in terms of numbers, the northern courtyard has 66 spaces currently in the initial wave to be provided. There are 46 spaces in the secure store to the west of the courtyard, and then in the southern courtyard itself a further 20 spaces, with the extra wide spaces are spread between each of the 3 key cycle space zones.
I'm sorry, welcome that notion of sharing around a bit, but I still have some concerns. Could you explain from the 46 spaces that access onto the west side of the site, that has also has it got 4 disabled bays there?
That has 2 extra wide spaces available into it, and obviously access both ways.
So it's 2 disabled and 2, what are they, service bays or?
No, sorry, in the cycle provision we're talking about.
No, I'm sorry, I'm talking about the parking area.
There's parking, there are 4 bays there, all of them are of an increased width to make them accessible.
Okay, yeah, so the question I'm asking is that those are all occupied by vehicles. Where do the cycles get from the store onto the road?
There's a circulatory space at the back of them, so they don't come up to the building itself. There's a zone where pedestrians and or bikes could move.
Okay.
Very limited access down there, and obviously it's principally from a separate DDA route.
So they
access in the back.
cycle down to the south of the site.
You come down to the end and then onto the highway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. you've been referring to this reception area as being manned 24 hours a day. You must therefore be assuming that there'll be quite a degree of disruption to surrounding residents, especially, as you've mentioned, takeaways rolling up at all hours of day and night, similar with taxis, all hours, day and night. Has any assessment been made on anticipated noise levels, you know, car doors slamming at 3 in the morning?
So we've obviously undertaken a traffic generation analysis comparing the proposed development traffic against the consented Mecca bingo traffic. And the briefing sheet that you've all been provided in advance provides a little bit of a graph on there. The blue line showing existing or consented bingo traffic, the red line being the proposed development traffic. And it's fairly easy to see that the proposed scheme will generate a consistently low level of traffic throughout the day. And Mecca bingo clearly has peak periods between 7 and 8 and 9 till around 11 o'clock, so late into the evening as well, at which point this development will generate far fewer trips.
Can you just confirm what time Mecca bingo shut?
Based on the information that we've been provided, it was around 11 o'clock.
Right, around 11. So after that period, deathly quiet for the rest of the night.
Councillor Douglas, you've been waiting patiently.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to ask your view of LTN 120 and cycle parking provision for residential accommodation. I'm looking at it here and it says it should be, or the guideline is 1 per bedroom. I'm just wondering if you do adhere to that guideline elsewhere, or whether it's a consistent under provision according to that guideline that you have. Thanks.
So the provision that should I say, starting provision that we're proposing at this site is consistent with consented schemes within York. I believe there's a scheme just up the road which has 65% cycle parking provision. Now we've purposely linked our cycle parking provision to the travel plan, which basically will monitor cycle usage year on year and promote more cyclists. So whilst we're starting at a 68% provision, sorry, we will be looking to get to 100% as soon as possible. Now, what the plans do show is that it's capable of accommodating that full 100% provision. What we didn't want to do from the outset is provide significant cycle parking that's not being used at the expense of public usable area. And hopefully over time, we can balance that out. So it's not a case of the provision that's provided now is going to stay. We're looking at increasing that over time, incrementally, subject to demand.
Thanks for that. So would you be, and I'm not even sure if it's possible to have a condition that holds you to that commitment so that you're regularly reviewing the cycle provision and expanding it as quickly as possible?
That is captured within the 106 agreement, which requests financial contributions towards monitoring the travel plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lomas.
Yeah, thanks. Just first wanted to pick up on something you said there in response to Councillor Douglas. I made it 61% cycle parking, not 68%. If there are 168 cycle spaces, but 275 rooms. And we did note, I think the last time we looked at this application, that although the rooms are designed to be single occupancy, that doesn't mean they will be occupied by only one person. I have two other questions. One is, last time we were expressed concerns about two-tier cycle parking, and I haven't seen in the update anything more about that. So it'd be good to understand, is there any two-tier cycle parking where one cycle has to be lifted up? And another question to help, what date did Mecca Bingo close?
If I can maybe address the cycle provision first of all, the internal store is made up of double stackers that's been designed and agreed with highway offices in line with the York Design Guide for double stack units. We've reduced the number prior to the submission of the application at the start point down to a level that was felt reasonable.
Right, are there any further questions?
Sorry, I've not answered the second question yet. So I think Mecca Bingo closed in March 2020 as a result of the pandemic, clearly, and national restrictions. So I think that the accurate answer would be that it then didn't reopen, which is a slightly different point.
Right, any further questions from members? In that case, no, I'll thank you very much indeed for your contributions and the answers you've given. And obviously we'll take your points into account when we come to decide this. We've been going an hour and 15 minutes now. I've had a request for a quick comfort break. So can I suggest that we take a break and meet back here at 10 to 6, if that's okay, 5:50. Indeed. And we move on to the section of the meeting when we ask members if they have any questions for officers. So any member, I'll try and catch the people. I think Councillor Fenton won by about a microsecond.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question for highways officers in terms of, obviously we had the debate at the last meeting around issues with the entrance on the Fishergate side, and mention has been made of a lay-by, and I'm struggling to deduce. Was a discussion about a lay-by and it's discussion about making use of existing provision. I can't see a lay-by on the Blue Bridge Lane side. I just wanted to get confirmation from highways officers. A, is there a lay-by, and B, where is it? Thank you.
We're just going to bring Ian Stokes in, Highways Officer. Ian, if you
Yeah.
can.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Yes, I'm Ian Stokes. I'm Principal Development Control Engineer, City of York Council. I'm also a resident of Fishergate, so I know this area fairly well. There isn't a loading bay on Blue Bridge Lane, but there are existing parking bays along Blue Bridge Lane, and those parking bays will allow for loading and unloading within the hour that's allowed to be parked there during 8 AM till 6 PM, and then it's unrestricted parking after 6 PM till 8 AM.
Thank you. You want supplementary, Councillor Pavlich?
So if there's unrestricted parking, can I ask, are all those bays on Blue Bridge Lane occupied during the evening hours? Has anybody ever done an assessment?
If you can excuse me for sounding out of breath, I've literally been down there in the interval and there is one vehicle parked.
That's what I call commitment to duty. Is that a supplementary, Councillor? Sorry, Councillor de Gaulle. Sorry.
It is, because this is something that I've raised as a concern. The description from the applicant said there would be enough space for 2 vehicles in the loading bay, but that seems to conflict with the advice that you've given, that saying that any vehicle could wait as long as it likes after 6 PM in that same location. So can we have some clarity? Which one is it we're going for? Are we having a designated loading bay with 10 minutes maximum, or are we having taking its chances on whether something permanently parked there when the delivery arrives after 6 PM or any time on Sunday?
The applicant is proposing a loading bay, but that will require an amendment to the traffic regulation order to put that through. And that amendment isn't guaranteed because TROs are subject to comment and objection and may not be put in place. The reason for allowing deliveries to load and unload either within an hour during the daytime or just whenever it needs to in the evening is making use of the existing parking bays should that TRO amendment not go through. So my belief is that ad hoc deliveries can be accommodated in the evening and non-busy periods during the day within the existing parking bays. And I have visual evidence to confirm that.
Sorry.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to ask about the Section 106 agreement in regard to expansion of the cycling provision and what that says and how that will be monitored or reviewed. Thanks.
It's covered in condition 24, which relates to the travel plan. So the condition requires the development to be carried out in accordance with the travel plan. And this is written into the travel plan that the annual monitoring will take place. So if you turn to, it's in the second paragraph in 24, it explicitly relates to the monitoring of cycle usage and providing extra facilities subject to demand, and that would be informed by the annual surveys. So it's that condition number 23 is the mechanism for us to secure extra cycle parking on site if we feel it's necessary in the future. Sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Watts, is that supplementary or not? No, in that case, I'll take Councillor Lomas was next. Thank you.
Yeah, just with regards to this lay-by / on-street parking spaces, I very much appreciate that you say there's one vehicle parked there during the break, but that was before 6 p.m. when parking is unrestricted. But that's obviously when there is a closed bingo hall on the site which has a car park. How does that actually apply to 275 residents living in that block? I'm not quite sure you can say there's enough with 2 on-street spaces which may be fully occupied for all of the hours between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. When you're comparing a large closed building with a car park with 275 bed student accommodation. I'm just struggling to see how that is the justification that there's enough.
Did you want me to come in there or leave it for Jonathan?
Yeah. I just wonder, are we still talking about the issue of servicing, or are we moving on? Okay. I wasn't sure whether you were talking about students parking or servicing. Okay.
Ian, can you come in?
Yeah, sure. The servicing side of things, if we're talking about ad hoc deliveries, yes, there will be deliveries on and off through the day for this development. I've walked past this site many times, even before it closed down, and have never found the parking bays to be full in the evening. And it's my belief that there will be sufficient capacity in there to cater for the 2, 3, 4, maybe up to 5 vehicles that would come and go there within an hour in the evening. There is a, sorry, I was just going to add, there is a profile in the transport statement that gives a spread throughout the day of the expected ad hoc delivery vehicles through there. And I think the maximum in an hour was less than 20. Maybe the applicant can confirm those numbers.
Councillor Lomas, was yours a follow-up question to that? Yes. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to distinguish between the kind of usage of these bays when you have a bingo hall which had its own car park where deliveries and visitors and servicing and work people, etc., would park, versus a new use for the site for 275 residences where there isn't any parking on the site for all of those servicing things.
But this is intended to be a car-free development for the students that occupy that site. And there can be conditions written into tenancy agreements forbidding students to be a keeper of a vehicle at the site or within a certain distance from it. The servicing vehicles, in terms of the parking bays that are along Blue Bridge Lane, they are, given that they are unrestricted between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m, they're more likely to be for visitors to adjacent residential properties. The bingo parking was self-contained within its own car park, as far as I'm concerned, and as I believe.
Councillor Lomas?
Yeah, sorry, I think there's some confusion between what I'm asking. I totally understand that this is intended to be a largely car-free development, largely car-free because there are 4 parking spaces provided on site. I'm absolutely making the point that the bingo hall had its own parking on the site, so wouldn't have had much call to use those spaces in Bluebridge Lane for deliveries, for tradespeople, work people, whatever. But we are looking at plans here for a development which will have need for deliveries, tradespeople, work people, etc. And I'm asking, is that enough? Is it enough to have 2 open access on-street spaces that you've rightly pointed out also might provide parking for visitors to other local residents? Is that enough? Or will there be a problem with servicing for this development?
There is already 1 space provided on the site for servicing vehicles, small servicing vehicles. There is a car club parking space on the site, and there are 4 disabled parking bays on the site. The 4 disabled bays are in excess of what's required under building regulations and also in excess of what's required for our car parking standards. On Bluebridge Lane, the parking bays allow for up to 15 cars to be parked at any one time. So I think in an evening where you could possibly have space for 15 cars to park, there'll be ample space for delivery vehicles to come in, bearing in mind that that will be out with the busy part of the day for school traffic.
Councillor Pavlovich, you had a supplementary. Do you still want to ask it before I come to Councillor Waters?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there is determined to be a problem further down the line, could the TRO be changed to make it 10 minutes waiting instead of an hour waiting? Would that resolve some of the issues?
The applicant has suggested that they can put some parking bays, some loading bays in there. That will effectively remove a couple of parking bays, but those loading bays will be for loading only. And the applicant has also offered a financial contribution to change the TRO. So members could decide to ask for that Section 106 contribution to be made and progress the change of the TRO. But again, that change isn't necessarily guaranteed, and the Section 106 funding will be for the process for changing that TRO. But the fallback position is there's sufficient available parking to deal with any ad hoc deliveries during the day and the evening.
Thank you. Councillor Waters.
Well, listening to that has given me another question to ask as a supplementary to all that. It's nice to know that there's only 1 vehicle parked down there at the moment. I presume it's very quiet and probably be very quiet for the rest of the night. But the officer said that there's been an assessment done of the hourly anticipated arrivals and departures down there. I'd just like to know what those figures are from, say, 11 o'clock till 4 o'clock in the morning, to see whether that peace and quiet will be maintained.
Do we have that information?
If you give me 2 minutes, I can try and find the relevant table in the transport statement.
I shall ask my other question of officers then, if you want, while he finds that. Just in relation to page 25 and paragraph 5.11, could the officers tell us that these 275 rooms, how they will be assessed for the council's housing requirements?
Well, so the first question, there's a table in the developer's note that shows what anticipated movements throughout the night. So it's 0 at midnight and it doesn't suggest any movements through the evening until we get into 7 o'clock in the morning. The question about housing, I think we answered that at the committee last month, that this type of purpose-built accommodation does count when we're doing our annual figures for housing delivery. There's a way it's done based on the clusters and how the calculation's made, but it does contribute to the council's annual housing delivery.
So how many does this contribute? There's 275 units proposed. Will it count as 275 units?
I don't think so. I can't tell you the exact methodology, but I believe it's related to the clusters. So it might be a calculation based on the number of clusters, but I couldn't give you a precise answer. I simply don't know.
Chair, I've been asked this at the last meeting. I really think we should have these figures every time, because potentially, taking with what you approved at the last meeting, you've 656 housing units up for grabs over these 3 applications. We need to have an indication of what this is contributing supposedly to York's housing need.
To be honest, I don't think there is, because there's a presumption in favour of sustainable housing development, because we are delivering the correct number of housing. So it's not relevant to the decision making on the individual application.
I'm asking for my own curiosity, and I'm very surprised that nobody can actually produce those figures.
Well, we've heard from the office that it's not relevant particularly to the determination of this application. You might want the information. I'm sure officers can perhaps try and provide you with that one as a written answer at some point. But I don't think we have the information tonight.
Chair, if I may come in, I have the information from Councillor Waters' question. In terms of hours from midnight to, from 10 p.m. till 7 o'clock in the morning, for each time period of an hour, the table in the consultant's transport statement based on a national database shows there are 0 trips between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. And in terms of maximum trips, I overstated it. It is 8 two-way trips in the peak time.
Thank you very much indeed for that information.
Chair.
Councillor Waters.
Can anybody around this table or in this room attach any credibility whatsoever to that? Do you know that there's people just laughing now? That is so ridiculous. There is no credibility to it at all.
Unfortunately, that is the information we have available. Any further members got any further questions for officers? Councillor de Gorn.
One quick one on that. Is in terms of the design, which we've now got with the loading bay on Bluebridge Lane, which obviously if the vehicle, either whether they come in and turn around after they're delivered or come in and turn around and they're going to be turning around, it's a cul-de-sac. Has that been taken into account in terms of the overall change that's been made from the previous design, that there will be a lot more turning movements and there's only effectively one hammerhead, which is the entrance to William Court, where larger vehicles can turn round?
Ian?
Yeah, in the hammerhead on William Court, that's where larger vehicles like refuse vehicles can turn around. There's plenty of room in there. There's also plenty of room within that for smaller vehicles such as carts to turn around. But the main transport statement that came through said the maximum number of trips coming through would be 8. So there would be plenty of room and plenty of time for that number of vehicles to be accommodated in that turning area.
Sorry. It's just to note there were conversations about having the lay-by on Fishergate before, and again that's one way there, so people couldn't turn around there. They'd have to go around the gyratory. So yeah, there's inconveniences regardless of which way you're going and having to turn around. But the turning, as Ian said, turning can take place on William Court. There's turning space for all the different types of vehicles that would use this development.
Thank you for that. Any further questions from members? No, in that case, we'll open it up to debate. Councillor Waters.
In the interest of trying to get this moving quickly, I'll start then. It just seems to me that it's such a wasted opportunity on a major road into the city to have what on paper looks a far better design than what's existing, that I certainly couldn't be voting to approve. I'm sorely tempted to say that I'd go to hell in a handcart than approve this, but I appreciate that's a totally inappropriate phrase to use.
I think you ought to learn what it means.
But I certainly know what it means, and I know it can be turned around as well. It is a wasted opportunity because a mixed use development here retains some form of community use, and to have housing units for York residents would be a plus that would be supported, I have no doubt, by the residents and by the majority of this committee. And what have we got? Something that ought to be refused because it's to the detriment to the amenity of local residents, whether you look at the highway side of it, the noise side of it. We've heard from highways officers with something that's fairly credible that seems to indicate that there'll be no taxis, there'll be no takeaway deliveries from 10 o'clock. It'll all be shut up and quiet like a chapel at 10 o'clock at night. It's utterly ridiculous. So I would just like to move refusal of this, and let's see how many people's going to stand up and actually refuse something for the benefit of York and the benefit of York residents. And let's get as much of this on the university as possible, because if these keep getting approved, the universities are going to keep expanding, creating a false demand, and you're going to be in this position month after month after month unless somebody stands up. So I would say refusal because detriment to the amenity of local residents as per your policies, detrimental to highway safety, which I'm sure we can all write policy to that in, and of course the big one that a lot of people brought up last time, the loss of an important community facility. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to accept that a facility that's been shut for 2 years during a pandemic isn't viable. It was viable before that. So I'll throw that on the table.
I'll second that. But what I want to make incredibly clear is when students come to our city, they are local residents. Yes. And I have in no way share Councillor Waters' concerns around students. However, what I want to be clear about is I think this is overdevelopment of the site, regardless of who was living in this site. I think that 275 dwellings in this space is too many. And I think that there are huge concerns around the access to the site. That is my predominant reason for seconding this, is because I don't think that there's enough consideration being given to the access to the site. And I am concerned about access to the site around school drop-off and pick-up time. I think that's a big concern. And I think this is an improved design on what is currently on the site in terms of the building, but it is causing the loss of a community asset. And I don't think that that's right without further exploration. And so for me, I will second that proposal, but I want it noted that it is not because of students in our city. It's because there's just been too much put in one space. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will be voting against this application for a few reasons that I want to document. Again, echoing Councillor Webb's comments, nothing to do with not wanting Students, as local residents, we absolutely do. They make a valued contribution to the city. I also want to thank the applicants for the work they did to improve disabled access and dignity for disabled people who might be using any development that was built here. That is appreciated. I want to make a point about Mecca Bingo. Mecca Bingo closed due to the pandemic, which has been accepted by the applicants. It didn't reopen because Mecca Bingo, in line with other similar businesses, found that after people moved to online gambling, it was difficult to get them back. Many businesses have struggled through the pandemic and have not reopened after closing down because of government restrictions that were put in place to keep us all alive. That doesn't mean, however, that this as a location and facility for social and recreational use by the community can't work in this location. It perhaps means that it was not going to be a bingo hall, but a large building, even if some redevelopment was required of it, that had use for the community for social and recreational purposes, should have been explored rather than completely changing the use in this way. I know that last time we spoke about this application, there was quite a lot of, dare I say, sneering about bingo as a cultural activity. And I make the same points now as I did then. Bingo developed as mainly an alternative for working class women to going to pubs, when going to pubs wasn't really an activity open to working class women. And it is valued by many people as a way that they can come together as a community. As Councillor Kilbane said, if we give people something fun to do in that area, they'll do it. I also have concerns about the lack of infrastructure and servicing issues for the site. We're told that it's largely car-free, yet only 61% of the people who live there will be able to park their bike securely. And some of those cycle spaces are double stacked, which we know is less attractive for cycle parking. So I have real concerns about whether it genuinely will end up being a largely car-free development if people cannot park their bike securely. There are many issues about access to the site that I don't believe have been adequately addressed, and I do not believe for 1 minute that the limited on-street parking in Bluebridge Lane will be enough to accommodate the amount of servicing traffic that this kind of development will bring. And perhaps if we were looking at a slightly different model, perhaps if we were looking at servicing being all addressed within the plot itself, such as Mecca Bingo, because it had its big car park where all servicing could be done, then we might be having a different conversation. But for those two key reasons, I'll be voting against this application.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton, I think you were next, and then Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Chair. I think the applicant is to be commended for the changes they have made on the back of the discussion we had last time round. I think in a way, certainly the change in relation to the entrance has resolved one issue, but potentially created others, which arguably outweigh the benefits that have been that have accrued from the change made following the first meeting, in terms of the potential. The opportunity hasn't been taken to provide the off-road drop-off space, which I think if it had been provided somewhere on the Bluebridge Lane frontage, would have gone some way to addressing some of the concerns. And I think the unrealistic projections in the transport statement don't help matters in terms of an assumption of zero drop-off traffic related to the development between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. I think is obviously unrealistic. I'm not convinced by the sort of the loss of community asset grounds, not on the basis that bingo is somehow in any way, shape or form inferior to any other form of entertainment. I'm just looking at the position of the operator. If it had been in use if it would appear to be more of a going concern, I think we might be having a different discussion. I'm not convinced by the argument, and I don't think it's appropriate to use in the context of considering this application that, well, it's all the university's fault for expanding. We have discussions about wanting to free up homes for general use, and that's a discussion we've been having more and more recently. But I'm concerned that the more applications such as this we turn down, the harder it will become for us to realise that ambition in terms of releasing more general use housing. But as other members have said, this application does have significant drawbacks, and I'll be interested to see what other members have to say.
Thank you. Councillor Doty, I think, is next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very brief because I think what I would have intended to say has been said by previous members on the committee. In essence, it's, in my view, it's overdevelopment, and the service and access arrangements, both on site and the immediate facility, to me, just don't seem to be sufficient in any shape or form. And on that basis, I'm afraid I'll have to vote against this application today.
Thank you, Councillor Ray.
Thank you, Chair. I note the comments from Councillor Waters, and at least he stopped short of referring to students as house snatchers this time round. So that's at least welcome. From that point, we're moving forward a little bit in terms of injudicious comments. I think the issue with this site is, I'm not sure what the solution for the site is. I think we all look at it and think we want something to happen on this site. The site needs to be developed. It needs to be brought back. We had that talk about mixed community. A lot of those issues we've had around impact on neighbours, on traffic, etc., would actually be made worse if you went for a mixed-use development. In terms of that, achieving that car-free aim is tricky. This is probably your best chance. I do take your point, Councillor Lomas, that there are issues around it, but I think this particular scheme is your best opportunity at getting a car-free scheme than anything else that would be developed on the site. So I think I'm with that one. And we talked a lot about wanting to create a mixed community, and I was somewhat concerned by one of the public speakers who said that this area has an average age of 50. So in many ways, if we are trying to create a mixed community in this area, then actually lowering the average age quite significantly is precisely the thing we should be doing. And one of the best ways to do that would be 250 students of the age of 18 to 21, which would really bring that age down and bring a mixed community. So I don't see another alternative use in terms of housing around this site that wouldn't create significantly more problems than this one, which just brings you back to retaining it in its cultural use. And despite Councillor Waters' expertise in the bingo market and saying it's quite clearly a viable bingo business, which I'm not sure what evidence we've had to refute the experts from Mecca or even Clifton for that matter, but I bow to Councillor Waters' knowledge of the intricacies of bingo business. I don't think it's going to come back as a bingo hall. So what would it come back as? And I struggle on a site of that size, what cultural use that would be. And again, whether those cultural uses would create the same level of problems. I don't think it would be somewhere that closed at 11 o'clock and was like a church ground after 11 o'clock. It probably would be open till 1, 2 o'clock, and you'd have some of the other issues. So I'm struggling at the moment to make a decision. I'm not minded to go for refusal. I'm not sold on the case for refusal, but I shall wait to hear more of the debate.
Thank you, Chair. When this application came before us on the last occasion, I had two significant qualms. One was the substation, and the other was the access on Fishergate. And I could not agree to support an application that had drop-off on that main road. The applicants have now addressed that by moving the entrance to Bluebridge Lane. And so in that respect, my qualm has been largely resolved. In respect of the substation, I think improvements have been made. I'd still rather have seen it in a different place, which then leads us to the other issues that colleagues have raised tonight. Whether it should be a big overhaul of moving forward, the fact is that Mecca Bingo have relinquished their tenancy of it. It has now been bought up by a developer. That developer now owns it. It's very unlikely that they will turn it back into a bingo hall. And therein lies my deeper issue of how these sites are used. I would much rather see it as accommodation for families, for individuals. But that's not the world that these developers live in. The profit for them, and you've heard it, I asked the question, it's viability. There's a bigger book in turning it into student accommodation than there is turning it into accommodation for families. And therefore they can afford to pay over the odds because they know that's where the money will come. I was going to say it on the next application, but I might as well say it on that. And that's the reality of the world we're living in. However, there are things that we can do through the local plan process. We can decide what is built in this city, and that's certainly submissions that I think we need to be making further down the line. Is that an issue for this application? I just genuinely don't think it is. And I think we have to judge it on our role as members of the planning committee. And for me, I'm afraid I can't find any planning grounds to refuse this.
Thank you for that. Any other members like to speak? Well, I usually wait till last, and I think Councillor Pavlovich has summed up my views almost perfectly. There are issues with it, slight issues, but as far as the actual community facility, the bingo hall is an ex-bingo hall. It has ceased to be. I won't go through the rest of the Monty Python Dead Parrot sketch, but it is not a bingo hall. Now, what other possible cultural facility could we get on a site like that that would actually fill the site and be viable? I can't think of one. And at the end of the day, we have to actually determine the application that's in front of us. And so I will be opposing refusal. If there are no further contributions, it has been proposed and seconded refusal. Can we just go through the grounds? Yeah.
Can I just come in here? There was 3 reasons for refusal. I've written the first 2 and I need to just advise further on the third. So the first one I've gone with, and obviously if you were to refuse, I would like the end formal wording delegated to the chair and deputy chair in conjunction with myself. But the proposal, by virtue of its size and scale, is considered to be overdevelopment of the site, which would have a detrimental impact to the amenity of the neighbouring properties due to the increased activity and disturbance due to the number of residents at the site. That'd be the first one. And obviously I'd need to quote the relevant policies. The proposal, by virtue of its size and scale, would have a detrimental impact on highway safety in the surrounding area due to the associated increase in activity on the highway network and lack of servicing facilities. And again, all the relevant policies. The community facilities one is potentially the one where I really do have concerns if members were to refuse it on that reason, given how in planning terms we need to assess the proposal and all the justification that's in the case officer's report. We don't consider that it's a community facility. So that would be my advice, to stick with your 2 original reasons for refusal. If you were to go with it, I'd say that you would refuse it on insufficient information has been submitted to justify the loss, not just the loss, but the insufficient information. And even then, as a planning advice, I have concerns with that, but that is if you were insistent on that, that's the way that I think potentially I would advise you is best to go down that route.
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Sandra Brannigan, Senior Solicitor. If I can just add, Mike, it is on, maybe I need to bring it closer to myself. Just in terms of Becky's advice in relation to the cultural facility or community facility point, if I may just add some observations, which is that obviously you've heard your officer's view is that it isn't a cultural or community facility in planning terms. But if members disagree with that, that's not the end of the story, because the planning policy in the NPPF 93 talks about it talks about community facilities or cultural facilities that are needed. So it doesn't talk about what might be in demand as such, but what is needed. In the sense that I think in the way that, for example, a doctor's surgery or a dentist surgery might be needed. So members, I think, need to consider whether there is an evidence need for these facilities rather than something which might just simply be desirable to have in a community. Thank you, Chair. I hope that was some.
Thank you.
And also just to add, as the Chair has already said, I think on several occasions, just to remind members, because much talk has been made about alternative sites for student housing and possible alternative uses for this site. But of course, as has been said, may I remind members that they have a duty to consider this application before them on its merits and not some alternative location for this proposal or some alternative use for this site. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'll just ask the proposer and the seconder, would you be willing to take out the loss of community facilities as a reason for refusal in view of the advice you've had from planning officers?
I just thought what Becky said about having incomplete information stacks up. How do you assess the viability of something that's closed for 2 years because of something completely out of everybody's control?
That was if you were going, what Sandra is saying is exactly right. Well, I can't reiterate enough what Sandra's just said in terms of the advice of the NPPF. So that is if you decide to go down that route. And yes, I know I wrote it, but that was if you decide to go down that route. And Sandra's given you very clear advice legally. Well, I can't say much more than that.
Yeah, go on. Well, just to add that has already been said, is this application is principally assessed against the NPPF, not draft planning policy. So the NPPF does not give a viability assessment requirement. It talks about need. Thank you.
Councillor.
So that further information you would be requesting would be evidence that the closed bingo hall is needed in that community as an open bingo hall. So that's in effect, the committee will be asking for evidence that there is a definitive need for that closed business.
That's the wording that I could get to.
We don't have that information. Okay, Councillor Webb.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is there is a need for working class entertainment in this city. I think there's plenty of high culture, but actually there is a need for something that isn't gentrification, I'd say. And I think that it would be difficult to evidence, and I accept that, Councillor, but I do think that we've got insufficient evidence here and insufficient information. And I do think there is a need, but of course, that's just me saying that. But again, we're in a position where there is insufficient information. Personally, I think the first 2 points that Becky's made are absolutely dead on, and they're my key ones. But I do think that the insufficient information is worth adding in.
Okay. Are there any further member contributions before we move to the vote? Okay, it has been proposed and seconded refusal of this application. Could those members in favour of refusal please show very clearly, please? 5, agreed?
Yeah.
And those against refusal? Nine. That proposal is lost. So now has any member got an alternative proposal to put place since that has fallen?
Sorry, well, the obvious counter to that therefore is approval subject to the section 106 and the amended, were there some amended conditions?
Yes, there were on the supplementary
As with the
additional information.
with the additional information as outlined in the supplementary paper.
Thank you. So that's been proposed. Sorry, I don't want to think I'm appearing obtuse, but there has to be a proposal for approval after refusal. You can't just take it. A refusal automatically means approval. Is that seconded?
Some of us, Chair, have been around long enough to go where we've voted against refusal and then voted against approval and stood here staring at each other going, what the hell do we do now? In all fairness, but apologies for being late. I was trying to work out where we're in to 14, but Councillor de Gorn has disappeared from the corner. I'm happy to second on that basis, Chair.
Right, so it's moved by Councillor Pavlovich and seconded by Councillor Eyre. Approval subject to the amended conditions. And a section 106.
In relation to the section 106, may I just clarify, because the committee report refers to TROs for Fishergate. Are we now amending that to Blue Bridge Lane, just for the minute and for the audit trail, as it were, through the minute? Yeah.
Well spotted. Thank you.
So is that both? Is that for both? Or is it for both Fishergate and Blue Bridge Lane? TROs?
No, the intention continued to be Fishergate.
Apologies.
Because it would prevent any
So it's
vehicles
covered.
stopping to load.
It's
from
covered
there,
by
so they wouldn't be allowed to do that.
Thank you.
It would be both.
Okay, are we all clear on that? Right, it's been proposed and seconded approval, subject to the conditions and the amended 106 and everything else. All those in favour of approval, can you please show clearly, please? Nine. And all those against, please show. Thank you. By 9 votes to 5, that application is approved. I think before the next application, we might just take a 5-minute break, if that's okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. If we can now resume after that little break. Moving on to item 5 on the agenda, which is Alton Cars York Limited, 3 James Street, York, demolition of existing buildings and redevelopment of the site for purpose-built student accommodation with up to 319 bedrooms, associated communal facilities, car parking and landscaping. Right. To you, Becky.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the proposed site block plan here. You can see the site outlined in red, and the proposal is, well, conveniently that A shape there. That is your proposal in there. You can see the neighbouring properties here, here and here, all around. And this is the proposed elevations to the north and west. You can see in the majority 4 stories in height. And here, so this is the south and east elevations where the height again has been brought down here and space in the roof. And the proposed elevations within the courtyards. This here is the elevations with materials, so you can see how there's going to be a mixture of materials throughout the site. Ground floor plan here. These are all in your pack, so I won't go through these in, but if we want to refer to them at any particular point. And typical room layouts, again, it is in your pack. And this is a high-level views, the massing model, so you can see how the proposal will sit within the existing properties. And again here, the massing in the A that you can see here and here. Again, one final one here. And visualizations. I know I say this to you every time, but make your decision on the elevations rather than the visualizations. So again, you can see there the proposals and the visualizations. I'm going to go back to the site plan and I'm going to pass you to Jonathan for the update.
Thank you. Committee updates. The first point is just a clarification in the officer's report. It refers to the clusters of student accommodation, and we did have an amendment to the plans, so the clusters do vary in size, providing between 5 and 8 student bedrooms. The report did specify up to 10, so it's not that many. The planning obligation, similar to the last item, we've recommended a planning obligation to secure the council to provide travel planning assistance to the site operator, and our recommendation is that that figure is quoted as up to 25,000, with the ability for officers to arrive at a final amount. There's a suggested condition change, condition number 3, which relates to site management. We've just added a final bullet point on, so I won't go through the condition in full, but it's there's a reference to arrangements for, requires approval of details for minimising disturbance during the arrival and departure time at the beginning and the end of term. I've also, we received further comments from Highways about the scheme, providing observations and recommended conditions. Again, these are summarised in the updates, and they don't result in a change to the officer's appraisal of the scheme and the recommended conditions in the agenda. Thank you.
I'll move on to public participation. We have 2 public speakers tonight. We have Councillor Rowley, who's been sitting there very patiently, who is speaking in objection. So if you'd like to come and address the committee, Councillor Rowley, I think you know the routine. I know a lot about stuttering. I used to have a very bad stutter, so yes. So do I, but I've learned to control it, luckily. Fire away.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee, I want to address you this evening about this application to build 319 new student rooms in James Street. I oppose this application for a number of reasons. Whilst the need for new student accommodation does exist in York, I don't believe that a genuine feasibility study has been completed to determine just how many extra rooms are required. Both universities have increased their capacity for courses, and it's estimated that there will be around 25,000 students in the city once all courses are filled. For many years, the trend for student living, and this has included my days as a student, has been halls of residence in the first year, moving into a student house with friends in the second and third year, and then for those that are doing a four-year degree, moving back into student halls to focus on your finals. This trend seems to be the case in York. We have plenty of HMOs in the city, and whilst in many parts of the cities, these HMOs provide affordable accommodation for hardworking adults, in the Hull Road, Badger Hill and Oswaldwick ward, many of these HMOs are student-led. I've asked the City of York Council on several occasions to let me have a number of HMOs coming back into the residential housing stock since the construction of many student blocks in our areas, but as yet my requests have not been met. However, I'm minded that you can only refuse an application on planning grounds. Therefore, I'd like you to refuse this application on the grounds simply of overdevelopment, particularly of student rooms. In 1/4 of a mile, that's 400 metres of this proposed development, in the last 8 years, the following student blocks have been built. Student Castle in Warmgate, 648 rooms. The Abode on Navigation Road, 506 rooms. Foss Studios and Samuel Tuke Apartments on Lawrence Street, 441 rooms. Vita Students on Lawrence Street, 644 rooms. The Brickworks on Holfield Road, 327 rooms. And finally, the Boulevard on Lawrence Street, 356 rooms. That's 2,922 rooms, all within 400 metres radius of this new application, not to mention the applications that have been approved over the last year and this evening. All of those will take that total to well over the 3,500 mark. The NPPF section 12, paragraph 130, subsections A, C and F talk about well-designed and integrated units. And I don't believe that this application affords that. And I think those paragraphs alone would give you grounds for refusal. I need to say that as a business owner near this property development, I can assure every one of you that this is not a case of not in my backyard. Okay, I already coexist very well with the students that are already living around me. This is more about not wanting to create an isolated student accommodation that's not integrated with residential homes and businesses. I'm also aware of the blatant need for affordable first-time buyer and social housing in the city. It's been mentioned earlier this evening that students are a vital part of the community, and I would endorse that. What I would say finally, Chair, there are lots of reasons why you should not approve this application, but on purely planning grounds, hopefully my overdevelopment case is an acceptable one, and I urge you not to approve this application on those grounds. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Do members have any questions for Councillor Rowley, please? Councillor Waters.
Would you say that it's not just overdevelopment, this is hardly mixed communities, which those that advocate these type of developments quite often use?
Yeah, again, Chair, if I might, in my answer to that, if I can refer to the NPPF that I made comment to in my 3 minutes. So yeah, section 12, achieving a well-designed place, paragraph 130, planning policies and decisions should ensure that developments A will function well and add to the overall quality of the area, not just the short term, but over the lifetime of the development. And I don't believe that the numbers that are being stated here alongside the 3,500 that currently exist within a 400-metre radius, and every one of you, including the planners, can challenge me on that because I've done the maths and I've done the walk and I've done the measurements. Okay, I don't believe that will allow this to function well with the overall quality. I mentioned subsection forgive me, Chair, I've written it down here, C, that they should ensure that they are sympathetic to the local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape and settings, while not preventing or discouraging appropriate innovation or change. In other words, increased density. And then finally, to create places that are safe, inclusive and accessible, which promote health and well-being with a high standard of amenity for existing and future users, where the crime and disorder and the fear of crime do not undermine the quality of life or the community cohesion and resilience. And I don't believe that this application meets any of those. And I think that on those grounds alone, not meant to mention the overdevelopment, you have grounds for, because I hear all the time, Chair, and I've sat on this committee, right, from good, honest councillors, and they are all good, honest councillors. I see no planning reason why I should not disagree with this or not approve it. And I believe I'm giving you genuine planning reasons.
Thank you. Any further questions from members? Thank you very much indeed for your contributions, Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Chair.
And if we can now bring in our next speaker, who is Gavin Douglas, who is the applicant, who is attending via Zoom, and he has 3 fellow assistants, 3 agents who are helping him, and they're in support. Sorry. Oh, sorry, they're in the room. Right, sorry. They're actually in the room. So, Mr. Douglas, are you available?
I am, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you. If you'd like to take it, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Chair, members, good evening. We're delighted to bring forward our proposals to deliver 319 much-needed student bedrooms on James Street, following the relocation of Alton cars to more suitable accommodation. These proposals provide a varied mix of room types, including apartments with generous shared kitchen living spaces, and a large communal space at ground floor, including a games area, a gym, cinema room, breakout spaces, and study rooms. As an experienced developer and operator of student accommodation, we recognise the importance of incorporating high-quality internal and external amenity space on site, encouraging opportunities for residents to interact and build relationships. We also understand the operational requirements of PBSA, including access arrangements, delivery protocols, parcel storage, security measures, building management, and student support. We recently delivered the adjacent Samuel Tuke House accommodation at the former Working Men's Club, and we manage over 680 bedrooms across our properties in York and Leeds. This site is ideally located close to both universities, allowing sustainable modes of travel. The proposals include a generous cycle storage provision and a significant increase in soft landscaping across 2 external courtyards. Our energy strategy is based on the use of air source heat pumps to satisfy upcoming changes to the building regulations, which far exceed the targets within the local plan policy CC1. For the last 12 months, we've worked closely with officers, including your design and conservation officer, to develop a design that responds to its local context and one that will provide a vastly improved outlook from the adjacent conservation area along Lawrence Street, one of the primary routes into the city. This was accepted by the Conservation Officer, the Civic Trust and the Conservation Area Advisory Panel during the course of the planning process. As summarised by the committee report, the proposed development is appropriate in its materials, massing and detailing. All technical matters have been addressed. The building is well located to assist in responding to a recognised need for student accommodation in the city. I will be happy to answer any questions you may have, and our planning and design team is also in attendance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If the planning and design team would like to come and sit at the top of the table, because you obviously will perhaps have some suitable comments. Right, do members have any questions for Mr. Douglas and his team? Councillor Douglas. Councillor.
Thanks, Chair. Can you tell me where the DDA compliant rooms are? Because I couldn't see them on the plan, and nor was there any mention of it within the report. Thanks.
I'll pass this to Matt Parkins, please, if I can.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear what you said. Oh, okay. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Matt Parkins from CSP Architects. Yeah, so I can't point them out all individually, but they're distributed around the building. We have two separate cores, two separate lift cores. One of them is right next to the accessible from the entrance. And there are UA rooms on the ground floor, distributed a number of UA rooms on the ground floor, and they're also on all of the upper floors. And on the upper floors, they're located close to the the vertical circulation cores, so that you don't have to do, there's not too much horizontal travel distance.
Councillor Douglas, have you got a supplementary?
Yes, please. So how many are there in the development in that case?
There's one,
In total?
In total, 16, 1 in 20.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask about cycle parking. It says there are 155 cycle spaces. That's 49% of residents. That's only servicing 49% of residents. So did you give any thought to providing cycle parking for all of the residents? And how many of those 155 offer parking for adapted cycles for disabled people?
Can you still hear me okay in the room? Yeah, thank you. So yes, of course, we've looked at the most appropriate number of cycle parking spaces. So as I explained in my speech, we actually operate over 680 beds, and we hear time and again that there must be a provision of 1 cycle space per bedroom. But in our experience, that's a massive over provision at the expense of other on-site facilities. So we undertook a cycle parking survey during the early part of last year on our site at Abode, Navigation Road, where we have 506 beds. And at the peak of user demand, we found 9% take up. Now we're in a site here which is not too different from the site at Abode. It's within walking and cycling and public transport distances from the both universities and the city centre. So what we've proposed that we do here is provide just under 50% at day one, with an option to increase that should there be a demand through the travel plan and the monitoring every year, to increase that up to 70%. But in our opinion and our experience, it's still a 5-fold improvement over what is actually going to be taken up. And just to expand, I've also checked our site in Leeds, which is in an equally sustainable location, and we found that 3 bikes were parked there out of 180 spaces. We also find that bikes at the end of term time are just left by students because they find that they don't use them. They're in rusted padlocks, and we end up having to cut the padlocks and offer them to charity at the end of each year. I think the 1-for-1 tends to come from residential demand, which is totally understandable, where you have 1 or more people living in an apartment, and there is more likely to be a demand for people who live there longer term. But in our experience, that is not the case in student accommodation.
Councillor Lomas, I think you have a further question on that.
Yeah, you didn't answer the question about spaces, cycle parking for people who need adapted cycles. And I also would question the comparison with Leeds, which has a much better public transport infrastructure than we do here in York.
Yes, I have the number of spaces. If you bear with me, sorry, I'm just opening up the correct document on my screen. It's a little more clunky doing this live on screen. So the accessible parking spaces we have 8 of those within the internal courtyard, and some of the spaces externally for visitors will also be oversized as well for accessible cycle parking needs. That's currently 5% of the current offer, and that percentage would increase again in the event that we had to increase to a 70% cycle parking provision overall. It's already been taken into account within the design.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Councillor Webb, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is sort of, well, it was going to be along the same lines, but I think I'll follow up on that. I mean, you've highlighted that you think that people don't, or the people that you want to live in these places don't want to use bikes. and for shame that they might have to be given to charity. I think that's actually not a bad shout at the end of term, and maybe we could condition for that. But one thing that I would say is, what contribution are you providing to the local community or to the site itself to improve cycling infrastructure, which might make it more appealing to people to cycle? I think, as Councillor Lomas has just said, in surrounding cities, they have better transport links, but even better cycling facilities along James Street would be an improvement.
This is something that we discussed with highways officers during the pre-application discussions. It's quite a convoluted cycle route in the area, as you'll all be aware. As soon as you come round the corner from Lawrence Street, cyclists are asked to travel on the road along Lawrence Street, and as you approach the traffic lights to head north up James Street, they're asked to enter onto the footpath and then drop back off it along James Street. And then there's very confusing cycle lane markings further north until you get to the designated cycle lane beyond Lidl. Directly outside of our site is actually arguably the clearest cycle lane along James Street to the south of Lidl, whereby there's clearly denoted cycle markings on the highway, in a very wide highway between us and the buildings to the east. So actually our site isn't necessarily in an area where there is a specific issue. We believe that they are wider spread.
Speaking as someone who broke the collarbone on that actual corner, I'm not sure I'd necessarily agree off my bike, but yeah, fair enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Pavlovich.
Thank you, Chair. In 5.6, it says that this accommodation will comprise a cinema, a gym, a study, a laundry, a games room. Can you tell me how that integrates the residents into the wider fabric of York? Basically, you're talking about move in, live here. You need never stick your nose out the door apart from when you go into college. Can you explain why this number of facilities have been added?
Yeah, certainly. It's predominantly through student demand. It's a request of students that they have these things on site. Equally, we've heard numerous committees when there is insufficient on-site amenity that there's there's concerns that there isn't sufficient space for them on site. We actually think that the most important things for students on site are breakout spaces, study zones, places that they can mingle and congregate, games areas. So it's important that they have these spaces to get to know one another, to be in order to be a student that relates well to their fellow students in a building. They need shared communal space. So we've provided generous shared living kitchen diner spaces for those that are in clusters. Those that choose to be in studios, and there is still a huge demand for that, they also need space. And there's nothing stopping them from using the wide variety of amenity spaces, the local pubs and restaurants and bars and leisure facilities in the area. But equally, there tends to be demand on site, and we feel from our experience that it's important to include that. Just 2 years ago, at our site at Abode, we actually removed bedrooms to increase the amount of internal amenity space for a games area and breakout study spaces for that very reason. So we believe it's far more of a benefit than a negative, and it actually helps the interaction of the students on site rather than stops them from moving out of the building into the wider community.
Thank you, Chair. The comments in the report from the landscape architects set, I suppose, bemoan a missed opportunity really to try and improve the streetscape on James Street. Obviously, the area is evolving, but the rather bleak street scene is not evolving. And one of the suggestions from the landscape architect was some more substantial tree planting along the street, but in the plans that we're looking at today, the setback is too narrow to accommodate that. I just wondered whether that was something you'd given serious consideration to.
Yes, it certainly was. I'd like to pass this over to Matt, please, to answer.
Yes, so this is all to do with the character of this part of the street, and so the like James Street's a long street, and it's got different characters. The far end of James Street, which has a broad highway and has buildings set back from it, is tree lined. But at this end, we're responding to the character and the nature of the environment on Lawrence Street, which forms the approach to the bar, and that environment is much more about buildings at the back of the footpath with enclosing the public domain, so well formed public domain, and so we deliberately didn't want to emulate the sort of the environment that was emerging at the other end of James Street, because that's more like a dare I say, a business park environment that's got broad highways and landscape margins. We thought that would be inappropriate here, where we're closer to the conservation area. We're right next to the conservation area here, and the character of the conservation area is not that. It doesn't have that sort of broad tree-lined avenues character.
Thank you, Chair. There's reference in the agenda, page 89, around about parking associated with the existing use frequently obstructing the footpath. Now, with less parking opportunities with the new development, is this going to cause a displacement of parking from other properties in the vicinity to other streets, causing further issue?
The parking issues that were experienced during Alton Cars' tenancy were from Alton Cars themselves. They've openly admitted and in fact moved to a larger premises because storage of vehicles on their site was a problem. So they had a large car park at the front of their property to the southern end, which faces onto Brinkworth Terrace. There was also an area of hard standing and soft landscape along the eastern edge of the building, which required them to drive across the footpath on James Street to be able to park additional cars there, in addition to renting land from ATS Euromaster over the road to be able to park a greater prevalence of cars over there as well. So this issue of parking on the footpath is purely because of the type of commercial entity that Alton Cars was as a body repair shop. It's not something that's found because of that location in itself. It's not derived, it's not an issue created by the site. It was the former use.
Thank you. Councillor Lomas next, then Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Can you give us an indication of the size of the different types of room and the layouts that you've provided, the typical kind of room layouts that you provided? I think one of them suggests that the bathroom opens onto the kitchenette in the room, which doesn't look very pleasant, even if it is allowed for, but an idea of the size would be helpful.
Yes, please, Matt.
Yes, so they vary. The study bedrooms are in clusters, are about 12.5 square metres, but the studios vary quite widely, typically about 20 square metres, but rising to 26, 27, 28 in the depending on where they are in the building.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of information on that on page 118. There's some information for members on that on page 118. I think
sorry, Chair, that I couldn't find anywhere on that page that told me the sizes, which is what I was asking.
I had to get a magnifying glass to read it, I must admit, but I think it is in there.
The one above me is the most recent one.
Right.
Yes, slightly updated to the agenda version, so the one on the screen.
Okay, now Councillor Waters next, I think.
Well, just in relation to what Councillor Doughty raised about parking issues there, I was surprised when I read that in the agenda, in that if you went down James Street right about now, 7:20, you wouldn't even be able to drive down you wouldn't be able to get down the middle of the road, bearing in mind all the buses that's recently come off service and waiting to get in the bus depot. They'd be completely blocking the road. There'd be people driving on the footpath. It's utter chaos for about half an hour every single night down there. Now, whether this application, if it's approved, will push forward the relocation of the bus depot, which is widely rumoured, and we'll be sat here in another few months with another great student housing block, I don't know. But whether the applicants would care to comment on the existing transport chaos down there, like I say, between about 7:15 and 7:45 every single night.
I'm not convinced that our proposal actually makes any difference to that. There's an existing issue that you're right to point out. The operational hours of Alton cars tended to be finished around that time, so I doubt they made any difference. But there's no suggestion from us in our proposal that we would make that arrangement any worse. You know, we're not in control of the use of adjacent sites, I'm afraid.
No, thank you for that. I was just amazed that nobody from the council's highways had actually picked up on that. They were keen enough to mention about the operation of Alton cars. But the question I'd really like to ask you is in relation to page 84, paragraph 5.10. We have this issue again, saying that these student accommodation blocks off-site would accommodate under 50% of students. Well, it doesn't matter how many is going to be approved. They'll always accommodate under 50% if the university expansion is completely and utterly out of control, which I'm so grateful that your figures actually demonstrated on the planning file, in that university student numbers have already exceeded, where we are in 2022, I think it was the figures that was estimated for 2029, and I'm sure Janet will correct me if I'm wrong. The simple fact is, the more of these that's built off-site, the more it gives a green light to the university to expand without any restriction at all. And we're never going to keep pace with this. We're never going to accommodate York residents when prime sites like this keep disappearing. I just wondered if you've got any comments to make on that.
Well, if I can just fill you in on the situation for the planning permission for the new campus. The section 106 is quite restrictive in terms of what the university is able to do on increasing student numbers and providing extra student housing. So the university is obligated to provide rooms for the growth in student numbers from 2009, when the first occupation of the new campus came. So every year we have to put a schedule in to the council that says how many extra students have resulted from the development, which in strictly speaking is just Campus East, but we do it right across the university, and how many extra bed spaces there are. And if the university gets in deficit from the number of students requiring accommodation, in other words, those who live at home, you don't count them, the university is obligated to start the process of providing another 300-bed college. Since that time, the university has been well ahead of the requirements. And if people, we send those in to Kevin O'Connell every year, if anybody wants to look at those. I don't know where the council keep it on their website at all. So the university has just built out student houses on the west end of East, and there's 1,468 spaces proposed there, and we are looking at the next phase. I've got a meeting on that actually tomorrow, the next phase. The point is, the university guarantee on-campus accommodation for first years. That gets taken up. But for the second years and the third years, they can actually live where they want. And for the university to have voids is a very big risk in financial terms. If you're building student housing, you have to know, because of the loans that you take out when you build them, that you're going to fill them. So the university monitors every year, where are you going to live next year? Do you want accommodation on campus? And the university is well ahead in providing student bed spaces at Heslington. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I do notice you mentioned the university. York has 2 universities. Could you
Yes,
give some information?
I can
for
go on
York
to St
John? I'd
John's,
be
yes.
grateful if you could put
Yeah.
that into the mix as
Yeah,
well.
we
Thank
act for
you.
St John's as well. So when we first started, there was, acting for St John's, which would be about 6 or 7 years ago, there was some student housing on Lord Mayor's Walk. But as the university has been very successful in the areas that they teach, they've decided not to have any student accommodation on campus at all. And those areas have been either allocated to some other use, or they've demolished. But St John's, again, has the same obligations to its students. They ensure that all the first years are accommodated. What's the one at Stonebow called? York Central, yes, which St John's actually owns that one. We're in the process of a scheme at Huntington Road behind what used to be the workhouse, their site there. We're looking to student houses now. And both universities are keen to provide this service, but you can't make students take accommodation. And the top and bottom of it is, living in an HMO is cheaper. And if you're from a low-income family, to go in some of these accommodations, the newest ones, the nicest ones, the most attractive ones, you've got a bigger student loan, and students have that choice.
Thank you. Councillor Pavlovich, you also had a supplementary. I don't know if you still... I thought you said it was supplementary.
It was a supplementary. It was absolutely a supplementary. Sorry, I've completely lost the track there. Yeah, it's about that. It's about James Street, and it's a question I will ask of the officers as well. But how are you going to manage site traffic during the construction phase? Because James Street is often gridlocked at the best of times, and I'm just wondering how you're going to minimise the impact of large vehicles coming in and out of the site on what will be a very regular basis during the construction period.
I'll take that question. It's a challenge on any city centre site, as you'll know. One of the benefits of this site is the construction methodology allows for a mixture of different approaches. So we've got a mixture of a steel frame and a lightweight frame, which will determine the number of deliveries and the regularity of them, and they're all managed through the contract. Now, obviously, there'll be a construction environmental management plan that's required, and as is always produced. To the very south of our A shape, there is space there for construction logistics, for offloading, for vehicles to turn around and then return out again. The contractors sometimes allow particularly under the ground floor, routes in and routes out. We've done that on other sites in the past. So given, comparing this scheme to numerous others, I don't think that the construction logistics are going to be as difficult here as they might be elsewhere. I totally agree that there may be issues with traffic in this area of the city. Again, that's out of our control. And regardless of what site is developed for any different use, you're going to find that in a city centre, you've got difficulties with that. The important thing is that it's well managed between the contractor and any discussions they may need to undertake with highways officers prior to start on site.
Councillor Pavlovich?
Sorry, I may have missed this, but there doesn't seem to be a condition for a CEMP.
Yeah, there is.
Is there?
Yeah.
In that case, I did miss it.
Yeah, and even if there wasn't, as a responsible developer, we'd be requesting one anyway. You know, we're not in the.
Bottom of page 92, it just starts there in customer 3. Yeah, that's okay. Right, any further questions? Councillor Waters.
Sorry, I thought Councillor Pavlovich was asking a supplementary question. It's just while Janet had the floor, I was just going to ask, if this is another one that's approved, it's just facilitating, once again, university expansion. Is there any end to this? Is it 25,000 students? Is it 30,000? Is it 40,000? Is it 50? At what point does York University especially say enough is enough? How much more of James Street, Hull Road, Tang Hall, Osbaldwick is going to become part of a suburban campus?
The expansion of the university isn't just students, it's research centres and world-class research centres, and also knowledge-based business uses, as you would call them, Science Park. Now, when we got planning permission for Campus East, it included 25 hectares of Science Park type uses. At that time, there was a recession in this country and they've hardly been taken up. The university's position now is completely different. So national and international institutes are banging on the university's door to co-locate with the university for specific subjects who have got world-class research experience. So what you will find as things go on, there will be a bigger mix of uses within the campus. But having said that, we have in the local plan a proposal for an extension to Campus East. And the evidence that we've got, we're quite happy that we can justify that. Policies in the local plan encourage the university to expand, to grow, and that's what the university is doing. So it's the amount of land, I suppose, that it comes down to that restricts what the university can do, and whether or not they allow co-location with research partners. So university development is very much opportunistic. If somebody really great comes along to have a research institute on the campus, the university will look at it carefully, which takes up the land. So it has been very much student-led in the past, but things are changing at present. I don't know if that answers your question.
I really appreciate that honest answer, Janet. Whether it concentrates other people's minds is a different matter.
Any further questions from members? In that case, I'll thank you very much for your contributions. It's been quite a long grilling, but we'll obviously take your views into account when we come to make a decision. I think we'll push on with questions to officers, if that's okay, since it's getting on a little bit. So do members have questions for officers? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Could officers just fill everybody in that's maybe not aware and say what business rates and what council tax will be generated from this development, please?
Consideration.
I don't know, and it's not a planning consideration.
Again, it was just for my curiosity. I'm sure the legal officer will be able to answer that.
Chair, I can't answer that. I don't have that information and it's not relevant to this committee's deliberations.
Well, just fair enough then.
Answer you, even if it were relevant, I don't have the information.
Oh, well, no. Absolutely nothing is the answer.
That's not a consideration. Can I go on to Councillor Lomas, please? I think you have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to know, are there standards for the size of study bedrooms and studios?
Not locally. In terms of national planning policy, we only have optional space standards, but they aren't for purpose-built student accommodation. They're for residential development. So there aren't any size standards as such. No.
Councillor? Yep, fine.
Just to take the point that Councillor Rowley was making in his submission, and it's a question that I've asked you outside of the meeting, is when does a neighbourhood actually reach saturation point? If you look at Lawrence Street and 1,300 student accommodation places in, I mean, literally 50 or 100 yards. To what extent does planning take into account the impact of this type of purpose-built student accommodation on neighbourhoods? I think Councillor Kilbane made the point in an earlier submission about neighbourhoods being hollowed out and the impact of lots of student properties all in one very small area. Does that do you take any account of that, or do you just say we have to judge everything individually but not in the round?
I think we have to look at the scheme in its own merits, and well, we can look at the area around here. If you were saying there was a saturation point, that's not enough. There has to be some evidence behind that as to thinking about the MPPF, what the harm is to the area, and if you could develop an argument to that extent, then that might be grounds for refusal. And I think in a similar way with the HMOs, we have part of the reason for the Article 4 direction that controls them. There was an evidence base around that which spoke about the potential adverse effects on a community too many HMOs could have. But that one of the benefits we find with the purpose-built student accommodation is that it's better looked after and it's better managed. So some of those impacts we see with HMOs about the untidiness of areas, etc., are not recognised with the purpose-built student accommodation, and we as a council don't particularly have any evidence that there's been adverse effect on communities as a consequence of the student accommodation that's purpose-built in this area. It's the opposite to that. It's been seen as a beneficial, having regenerational impacts on the Warmgate area and Layerthorpe as well, more so now that it's improved and regenerated the area rather than had adverse effects. So that's our position. But if members thought there was evidence of a harmful impact on a community, potentially as a reason of development, then that could be a reason to oppose a scheme.
So you've not had any evidence presented to you, but have you actually then gone out to say what is the impact on these neighbourhoods? City of York's great for doing consultations. Have we ever done a consultation on how do you feel about having purpose-built student blocks near you? It's just, how do you get the evidence base? Because I can give you all sorts of anecdotal stuff. Councillor Waters would give you all sorts of anecdotal stuff, but that's not evidence.
Well, yes, I don't know that the local authority has done that research in terms of purpose-built student accommodation. We did it to a degree for the HMOs, but we haven't done it for purpose-built student accommodation. And my only evidence is anecdotal as well, and I'm not aware of harm that's happened to those areas where we've seen large new purpose-built student accommodation. As I say, in my experience, it's on the contrary. And when we had the first major schemes around Navigation Road, that was one of the concerns that residents had, that there would be adverse impact on the area, but that doesn't seem to have developed, and it seems to move away when we get as more and more applications come in. As I say, we've got the conditions in there to make sure there is site management and that the behaviour is controlled. In my mind, increasing the population at these densities has a beneficial effect on the local facilities in the area. So
Councillor Waters, is yours supplementary to that, or is it a new question?
Yeah, it's a supplementary. I fully support what Councillor Pavlovich is saying. For officers to be making statements like that needs to be backed up with some form of evidence. Set a consultation up at Tanghall Club. I'm so sure you'll soon find out from the few residents that's left in that area what they think of it and what they think of this council for what has been done in that street and in those areas in the last 20, 25 years.
I would just say there are university towns with far greater concentrations of students than York. My old university, St Andrews, has 17,600 people, 8,600 students. There isn't an issue. So I do think you are, to some extent, over-egging it. There is definitely a problem, but I think we need to look at where...
Chair, this has got nothing to do with this application right
I
now.
agree with you. Can we move on to Councillor Eyre? I think I've got something to say.
I think it was sort of, Mecca, I was sort of following on from that, but I'm going to try and steer it into something a bit more about planning. And it's I've got the words of Councillor Looker ringing in my ears. That's always stayed with me. And that, similar to the adverse impact we have, one thing we do really lack in the city centre, and I can hear Councillor Looker say it to me, is amenity space and play space. And one of the adverse impacts you do get from developments like this is because there is no requirement to provide that. If you do get that level of saturation, there is absolutely no land available to provide those small play areas or those football fields for people to kick around. For those other, which I appreciate the students might not necessarily, well, in my days as a student, there probably were quite a few of them sitting in the swings and doing that sort of thing. But while they wouldn't be directly impacted, the more land we lose taking up on this and that concentration, you get to a point where you're never going to be able to, when the residential comes along, there will be no land left to provide that. Is there any way that can be a material planning factor in terms of some of that concentration level?
It certainly could be. I think in terms of sports provision, for example, it tends to be accepted by us that the universities provide for that. And we do tend to expect there to be a reasonable amount of outside amenity space on sites. If there's zero amenity space on a site, we would normally decide whether we could get a contribution to if there was a space in the local area that could either be provided for, or if there's somewhere in the local area that could be upgraded. So there is the possibility there for us to seek contributions towards off-site amenity space if we think it's necessary.
You kind of look at all that residential at the back of there, none of which will have been required to provide play, for example, but there's now going to be no land within the 2 mile radius of those. None of them in themselves were enough to warrant its own play area, but there is need for play area in there, and now there's just no land left within. We know from the section 106, Heworth is an area that benefits quite well from section 106 because it's the nearest city centre ward and location towards. Where is it? Heworth Golf Club, Heworth Cricket Club, take Heworth Tennis Club, pick up a lot of the section 106 funding from the city centre because it's the nearest available sporting areas. And St Nick's Field is another one that picks up from the city centre. That's not catering for these areas, but if we don't safeguard some of that land, then there will be no opportunities. We'll be sat on small quantity of section 106 money that we can never spend.
Is yours a supplementary, and is yours a supplementary? Because you were first, Councillor Waters, but
I was just trying to move it on and recommend refusal.
we haven't moved into debate yet, so I'm not prepared to
We
say
get
that.
on to debate. I don't want to ask a question, but there's a lot
Well,
of
I
things
think
I
it's fair
want to
that members
say.
should ask questions.
Can't we just...
No. Right, Councillor Webb, you had a question.
Yeah, no, my question, I hope we can be quick about this, is on section 106. And I mentioned it to the public participants about cycle infrastructure on that road on James Street. You know, I think the applicant spoke about it being okay at that end, but I think it's not very well managed, and it is a bit all over the place along James Street in terms of cycle provision. Was there an investigation into anything about that for section 106?
Not that progressed. No, I think to do something meaningful, you would have to look at the street in its entirety. I think to make a meaningful improvement, because as was explained, it changes as to whether you're allowed on the footpath or whether you're expected to be on the road, which makes it tricky. But if we had a scheme earmarked where the councils were looking at a comprehensive improvement to James Street to plug into the area further north where we have got better cycle facilities. But we don't have a scheme there that we could ask the developer to contribute to at the moment. So we wouldn't be able to show that there's something that can be delivered. There's no project that's costed up. So that's why we haven't sought a contribution there.
Any further questions? Good. Now we can move into debate. Councillor Waters.
I'd like to move refusal, grounds that it's detrimental to the amenity of the residents in the area. Again, it represents another missed opportunity in that if the building was basically compressed so the green space wasn't in the middle, it was out on the edge against James Street, you might get the ecological improvements that the council's ecologist has recommended, i.e. a tree-lined approach to James Street. Call it what you wish, but if the building's set back, you may even be able to squeeze in your cycling improvements as well.
Councillor Doty.
Thanks, Chair. I'll second that. In fact, the Guildhall Planning Panel, page 79, references the fact that the site doesn't have any landscaping to the front, and they suggested setback. That might have been a better option to provide some green space at the front of the development where everyone else can enjoy around it.
Before we consider that a vote on that, I'd like to hear from some of the members. Councillor Looker.
Yes, I mean, I'm not saying at this stage whether I would be voting for or against. I'm emotionally, I'm not happy with this. I don't think it's a very attractive development. I have very significant concerns about the number of student accommodation there is in what is a very small area. But what I want to pick up, I mean, in a sense, Councillor Eyre touched on it. What we lack is a plan, is a coherent plan for how to manage the city's spaces. Now, if you go to Huntington, if you go to Heslington, if you go to Haxby, you get nice town plans, community plans, village plans. What the City of York hasn't got, though it may shortly have a Minster area plan, but that's a very tiny little space. What we haven't ever managed to get our heads around is how we manage a city centre. A city that is changing visibly within the city walls, and lack of amenity space is a big one. We were looking in Guildhall Ward as to how we could take up offers of holiday sports games for young people in Guildhall Ward during the summer holidays. And if our one local primary school in Park Grove allows us to use their playing field, we can take it up. Otherwise, there is not a space unless we take over Parliament Street and come and do our football kicking around the middle of Parliament Street, which actually be a nice way of using Parliament Street. I'm all in favour of that. Bring in a sandpit is what I say. But until, as planners, we can stop just looking at each individual item on its own merits, you get no context, you get no sense of the community, and you get no sense of the viability of an area. I'm terribly sorry that we seem to be losing the commercial opportunities in James Street. God, I remember James Street being developed. That takes me back. And it was being seen as an area for business opportunities, for commercial use. Yes, probably a car servicing area was not the best place for it in the middle of James Street. But you do feel, again, that we are losing those job opportunities, those commercial opportunities. And if I just vaguely touch on Councillor Waters' point, the council tax and business rate opportunities for having a business in that site. But I can't see, apart from, yes, there is some notional overdevelopment. I'm struggling at the moment to say whether I can turn it down, but I do think it's partly because this city lacks any sense of coherent planning policy for the city. It's got it for Heslington, it's got it for Haxby, it's got it for Wigginton, I suspect, but it doesn't have it for York City, the old walled city. We just take each application as it comes and live or die with the consequences.
Thank you, Councillor Pavlovich.
Yes, difficult to answer, to follow that. I think there are additional grounds on overdevelopment, and I think it's more than just notional. This is a large building with a lot of students. It's got significant height. It does impact on the neighbouring properties, and I therefore feel that taken in the round, and I do feel that we have to start taking things in the round, including whether this should be commercial. It may not be a planning condition. I just think overdevelopment is my grounds. But the points that Councillor Luck has made, and I think others have made about amenity space and everything else, are really well made. Because if we continue just to build piecemeal, it'll almost in the blinking of an eye, and we won't see it until it's happened. We'll walk into York and it will be a different place to the one that we recall. So I am, and I don't think it's incongruous with the vote I had on the last application, but I think this is an overdevelopment for this site. So I will be voting to refuse.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lomas.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with the overdevelopment grounds that have been put forward. I also have concerns about parking for bicycles on site. And in addition, I have a concern about size of rooms, which we have discussed in previous meetings in relation to student developments. We've been told there isn't a standard for size of rooms, but I looked it up quickly online, and the average size for a study bedroom for purpose-built student accommodation is 13.4 square metres, and the average size for a studio is 20.6 square metres. So I think that puts the study bedrooms in this development under average and the studios around average, bearing in mind that the larger figures quoted apply to those rooms which have reduced head height at certain points because they're in the roof. So I have a concern about the amenity this development would provide for residents if their study bedroom was so small. And in order to try and visualise what that would look like, I thought about a 12.5 square metre study bedroom being equivalent to the back bedroom of my 1950s semi, but it's got a bathroom in it as well, and it's your only room in the property apart from the communal cinema room and other facilities there. And one of the studio layouts does show the bathroom not just opening towards the kitchen, but actually the bathroom door touching the kitchen as it opens, which I don't think provides a standard of amenity for residents that is really consistent with the dignity and respect with which we welcome students to our city. So those are my concerns in addition to the overdevelopment.
Thank you. Councillor Fenton.
Thanks, Chair. I think the the point is well made around the character of James Street in terms of it's largely industrial commercial use, and particularly as a base for small business. If you go around the Rail Centre, you see precisely how many units there are there that are in use and seem to have popularity. And I would hate us to be in a position where that kind of central commercial space were gradually eroded and moved out of town, with impact that might have in terms of longer distances. Is that a sufficient grounds to refuse this application on the basis of the information we've got? Probably not. In terms of the scale and massing of the site, I think not setting it back was a missed opportunity to try and improve the streetscape. And I take on board the applicant's comments around it being in keeping with what exists on Lawrence Street, but yeah, I think it was a missed opportunity, and yes, it's adjacent to other residential accommodation, so in that sense, it could be seen as an extension of that that enclave, rather than being too sort of sticking out like a sore thumb. But it does represent an incursion into what is otherwise a valuable commercial space, and that's a concern.
Any other members like to make a comment? We've had it moved and seconded for refusal. We need to clarify the actual firm reasons for that, and we wish to take forward. Have you got the reasons for it? Sorry, for those who are watching on YouTube, we've got a very annoying whistle from a radiator, and we're just trying to fix it, which is driving me mad. Although some people said I haven't got far to go, but there you are.
Okay, so I've only got the one from Councillor Waters. I haven't done anything additional in terms of room sizes. So the proposal, due to its size, scale, design, would result in overdevelopment of the site, which would be detrimental to the amenity of the surrounding area. That's as far as I've got so far, but that kind of covered it.
I'm quite happy if anybody else wants to pile in.
Sorry, go on, John. I didn't even have my microphone on. I'm really sorry. Go on, John.
I think some of the points that have been raised were about the impact on future occupants of the building as well.
The future occupants as well. You want
The
that?
amenities
So, but do you want that as one reason for refusal or two? That's my. Is it because they're two completely separate things, aren't they? Because what Councillor Waters is saying is the size of the building would have an impact on the neighbouring properties and the character of the area due to its size. But then obviously what Councillor Lomas is saying is the size of the rooms isn't sufficient, and that would have an unacceptable impact on the amenity of the residents. Yes, so that's two. And that's not what Councillor Waters says, so it's whether or not he wants to amend.
Whether we say the size and use, proposed use, bearing in mind the comments made by others as to.
So you want size, scale, design and use?
That's where I would have put, and it covers other comments that was made very eloquently by Councillor Looker.
But we still, yeah, that's fine, but we still haven't covered, do you want the other reason for refusal at Councillor Lomas? Sorry, I had a moment.
Like I said, the more the merrier.
That's a yes. So I'm taking that as a yes, right? Okay. So then you would then look at a second reason for refusal that raises due to the. Give me a minute to think about that one, but yeah, I think you can word something around that because we've done it previously. Yeah.
I was just going to say, Becky, do you remember plum base?
Yeah, we've done it. Yes, we have done it before. So if you could delegate the final wording of those two to the chair and deputy chair and myself, that'd be appreciated. But yes, about the standard of amenity being unacceptable due to the size of the rooms. There you go, got it.
Are there any other members who would like to speak before we go to the vote? Councillor Eyre.
I just wanted to clarify the way you worded that, because it said the overdevelopment and the impact on residential amenity. So that would just be of the residents in Heron House and
No, I said the proposal due to its size, scale, design, use would result in overdevelopment of the site, which would be detrimental to the amenity of the surrounding area. So I just said amenity. I didn't, because that covers your design. It covers, we potentially can word it better than that when we go away and think about it. But by amenity, I mean everything that was raised in terms of the design to the front not being set back, but also the impact on the neighbouring properties. I'm kind of doing that as a catch-all.
I'm not looking confused. You're not looking confused for one, but.
Anyway.
Right, in that case, I'll put it to the vote. We've had refusal, moved and seconded. All those in favour of refusal, could you clearly please show? 8. 8.
Yeah.
And those against refusal, please show. That application is refused. 8 to 6. It's 8 to 6. Right, there being no further.
2 seconds. Can I just confirm that we will get the final wording agreed with the chair and deputy chair as long with myself? Okay, thank you.
There being no further urgent business, I declare the meeting closed and thank members and officers for their attendance and their contribution.